Go Figure TV. Revolutionary salute. Revolutionary salute. Like, share, subscribe. Welcome to the House of Revolution. You know I'm your humble host, the Yao Mean of Revolution. And Putin checkmates the Western Africa. Burkina Faso becomes a superpower. Before we get into that, be sure to wipe your feet. That means hit the like button. Like, share, subscribe, support the platform, y'all. Let's get right into the content tonight. Putin playing chess, they playing checkers.
What if I told you that Burkina Faso is about to become one of the richest African nations overnight? Yes, that's right. Russia's state oil giant Gazprom has just discovered a staggering 50 billion barrels of crude oil in the heart of Burkina Faso. And now, Captain Ibrahim Traore, the revolutionary...
We're going to look at a video after this video go off. Well, France a year ago said that this was a lie. France been knowing about these trillions of dollars worth of resources. The U.S., Germany, everybody know about this shit. That's why they've been trying to seize this territory, pretend like Al-Qaeda wanted this land. But Russia proved you're trying to seize territory. You're trying to put terrorists on property that has trillions of dollars. Burkina Faso is now the Saudi Arabia of Africa.
Leader of this small, landlocked country is setting his sights on turning it into the next Dubai.
This is good news from Burkina Faso. Just imagine Russia has discovered 50 billion barrels of oil in Burkina Faso, one of the largest in the world. Meaning that Burkina Faso is going to be like either Saudi Arabia or Kuwait. And let me tell you, the people in Burkina Faso are very, very happy because number one, they have a selfless leader, Ibrahim Traore, and they know that under Ibrahim Traore, everybody is going to get a share of this. And the second thing is what Russia has said. Russia has said they are going to help Burkina Faso in extracting this oil, selling it, refining it, and they are going to use people from Burkina Faso to do all this job. And they are not going to take anything because already they are very, very developed. Just imagine for a very long time, France said that Burkina Faso is very, very poor and they were not willing to leave Burkina Faso. And now they have discovered 50 billion barrels of oil deposits.
But what does this mean for Africa, for the West, and for global energy geopolitics? This is not just about oil. This is a global power play, and the game just got serious. Before we dive into the oil, let's talk about the man at the center of it all, Captain Ibrahim Traore. Just 36 years old, this military officer rose to power in 2022 after a coup d'etat that ousted the previous transitional government. Young, charismatic, and unapologetically anti-Western, Traore has quickly become a symbol of a new Pan-African wave. He's expelled French troops, nationalized resources, and aligned Burkina Faso with other military-led regimes in Mali and Niger. His message? Africa must rise. And this oil discovery might just be his golden ticket. In early 2025, Gazprom made an announcement that sent shockwaves across the globe. It had discovered oil reserves in Burkina Faso estimated at 50 billion barrels. That's almost double Nigeria's proven reserves. So how did this even happen?
France said this was a lie. And I'm even going to show you the video where France 24 News said, no, that was sewage. A year ago, they said, that sewage. Ain't nothing over there, nothing to see here. Yeah, right. That's what y'all was trying to steal.
Sources suggest that exploratory drilling began after secretive Russia-Burkina talks last year. Satellite surveys and seismic data pointed to a vast sedimentary basin under Burkina's Sahel region. And boom, black gold. 50 billion barrels would make Burkina Faso a top 10 oil power globally. If confirmed and extracted properly, that's bigger than Libya, close to the UAE. Let's be real. Russia didn't just stumble upon oil in Burkina Faso. This is part of a bigger geopolitical chess game. After being hit by Western sanctions post-Ukraine war, Russia turned to Africa, offering military support, economic deals, and anti-Western solidarity. With French influence waning and U.S. presence thin, Russia saw a vacuum and filled it. Gazprom's presence isn't just about oil. It's about anchoring Russian influence in West Africa, creating a corridor of allied regimes from the Atlantic to the Red Sea.
It has been officially confirmed that 50 billion barrels of crude oil has been discovered in Burkina Faso. This is equivalent to over $3 trillion worth of crude oil discovered in Burkina Faso by a company named Gazprom, a Russian oil mining company. And according to the Russian government, they are saying that they are not going to take anything from this oil, but they are going to use people of Burkina Faso to extract the oil, refine the oil, and sell the oil. And the people of Burkina Faso are happy because they know that each and every single person is going to get their share. And I promise you, as I said yesterday, Burkina Faso is going to become the next location of Dubai. That is why this week, when he was having a summit meeting with his people, they tried to tie him. You understand? According to news reports, a man disguised as a security man standing in the crowd 10 meters from Ibrahim Traore tried to, shoot him down. And then his elite security soldiers spotted him and caught him. According to this report, this man came into the country not far ago, let's say 10 days. He came into the country not long ago. And when Ibrahim Traore was doing, we will not budge to this worstness, the man tried to buy him. And the report states that his bank transaction that he used to receive monies were foreign, and the transaction that came into his account were foreign transactions. So it means that this elimination attempt were really orchestrated by the Westerners. Bro, Burkina Faso is about to be rich. That is why this 3rd April, they went for a summit in Russia, in Moscow, a country called Moscow in Russia. When they wait for that meeting, neither of these 3 Sahel presidents showed up. They rather sent their ministers. So Burkina Faso, the Traore didn't show up. They sent their ministers instead, and they discussed security, education, economic development, ways they can improve the security, education, and the economics of their country, the economic stature of their country. You don't understand? So right now, Burkina Faso in 10 years is going to be the richest country in Africa. No doubt about that. Captain Ibrahim Traore, may God protect his soul from this Westerners. You don't understand? Type amen in the comment section if you want your president to be like Ibrahim Traore. I know it's going to keep long, but metete, everything's gonna be all right. Nigeria, Ghana, we did.
Now let's talk about Traore's wild, or maybe visionary, plan. Inspired by the UAE's transformation, he's openly declared his ambition to turn Burkina Faso into the next Dubai. New highways, a financial hub in Ouagadougou, solar megaprojects, and of course, a state-owned oil company modeled after Saudi Aramco. The plan is to nationalize the oil sector, reinvest in infrastructure, and use the energy wealth to leapfrog into the 21st century. But can a country facing insurgencies, poverty, and a lack of infrastructure really pull this off? Let's not kid ourselves. This discovery has sent alarm bells ringing in Western capitals. The US, France, and EU are watching closely. Burkina Faso's pivot to Russia threatens NATO's energy dominance, especially as the West races to decarbonize and diversify energy sources. There are whispers of sanctions, regime change strategies, and covert operations. Meanwhile, China is reportedly interested in joining the party, offering investment in exchange for oil contracts. Welcome to the new great game, and this time, it's being played in the Sahel. For many Africans, this moment feels historic. A young, defiant leader, backed by a global power, discovering massive wealth beneath African soil and pledging to use it for Africans. But history also warns us. From Nigeria to Angola, oil has often brought more conflict than prosperity. Can Traore avoid the resource curse? Will Burkina Faso become a model of self-sufficient African development, or just another pawn in global power games? There are real challenges. Security threats from ISIS-affiliated groups, corruption, lack of technical expertise, environmental risks, and the sheer scale of building an oil economy from scratch. Traore is popular now, but managing expectations in a poor, conflict-ridden country with dreams of Dubai-level wealth is no small task. The world will be watching, and so will the vultures. This story is just beginning. 50 billion barrels of oil could change everything, or nothing. Will Captain Traore rise as Africa's boldest leader, or will Burkina Faso become another cautionary tale? One thing is certain. The Sahel is no longer just a battleground, it's a global crossroads, and the world's eyes are on Burkina Faso. If you found this video insightful, hit that like
Russia is building alliances with African countries, and Russian President Vladimir Putin personally respects African leaders like President Ibrahim Traore. However, in all this, we hear Western propaganda that Russia is trying to replace the neo-colonial European countries in Africa. Sometimes, even the people of Africa feel suspicious until they realize the truth. Russia never colonized Africa. During the Berlin Conference in 1884 and 1885, European countries drew lines on the African map and decided for themselves which colonial power would have which African country. The fate of a continent was decided by foreigners. However, in all that, Russia was absent. It never colonized Africa, nor did it want its resources. So expecting today that Russia wants colonial influence in Africa is against history. But a question arises, why did Russia never colonize Africa? In this video, let's find out. In 1884, representatives from 13 European countries and the United States gathered in Berlin under the invitation of German Chancellor Otto von Bismarck. But this wasn't some noble summit for peace or diplomacy. It was a cold, calculated meeting with one goal: divide Africa among themselves without firing a shot at each other. This event became known as the Berlin Conference, and it was the beginning of the so-called Scramble for Africa, a dark chapter where the entire continent was divided like slices of cake with no African voice in the room. Colonial powers, including Britain, France, Germany, Belgium, and Portugal, claimed vast regions of Africa on maps as though they were moving pieces on a board game. They weren't interested in borders that respected ethnic groups, languages, or kingdoms. They simply drew lines, many of which remain to this day, that split entire communities and created fragile, unstable states that have struggled with conflict ever since. However, in all this, one European giant was absent: Russia. The country, despite its status as a major empire, did not participate in this land grab. It didn't claim a colony, didn't redraw maps, and didn't establish plantations or forced labor systems on African soil. This absence wasn't due to ignorance or indifference. Russia was aware of Africa's strategic and economic value, but it stayed out. And to this day, that decision gives Russia a unique status on the continent. Unlike France and Britain, Russia carries no colonial scars in Africa, and that history still affects how many African nations view Moscow in the 21st century, not as a former oppressor, but as a potential partner. However, if we try to chart out reasons why Russia never colonized Africa, besides the fact that it never wanted to exploit Africa, there can be a number of reasons. One of the most practical reasons Russia never joined the African colonization race could be geography. It simply didn't have the same maritime advantages as its Western rivals, and it never felt it was at a disadvantage. Unlike Britain, France, or Portugal, which had easy access to the Atlantic, Russia was landlocked in ways that made African adventures nearly impossible. The country's main ports in the north, like St. Petersburg or Archangel, were frozen over for much of the year, making naval deployments slow, seasonal, and unreliable. Its southern access to the seas, via the Black Sea, was controlled by the Ottoman Empire, a bitter rival. To reach the Suez Canal, the crucial shortcut to Africa, Russia would have had to pass through this hostile territory. And even if it had succeeded in getting past the Ottomans, the Suez Canal was under tight British control. Britain was not going to let a competing empire stroll through its geopolitical lifeline without a fight. So, in contrast to empires that sailed across oceans to exploit colonies, Russia turned its ambitions inward and eastward. It pushed into Siberia, Central Asia, and the Caucasus, vast regions that were within marching distance and already part of its land-based empire. These areas offered abundant resources, land for expansion, and far fewer geopolitical roadblocks. Before we continue further, tell us, are you enjoying the video? If yes, please like and share the video and subscribe to our channel to watch more videos on Black Africa. Let's continue now. To put it plainly, Russia's strategy was continental, not maritime. While others crossed oceans, it carved out its empire by land. Even if the geographical challenges didn't exist, Russia in the 19th century was simply too unstable to even consider colonizing Africa. Internally, the empire was in a constant state of crisis. The czars were facing mounting pressure from peasants, revolutionaries, and a crumbling economic system. One of the most defining features of Russia's 19th century struggles was serfdom, a feudal system where millions of peasants were bound to the land and forced to serve wealthy landlords. Serfdom was only abolished in 1861, decades after most of Europe had moved on from such systems. But even after emancipation, the transition was disastrous. Former serfs had no land, no resources, and no real freedom. Landowners lost their free labor, and the economy struggled. This meant that while countries like Britain and France were experiencing industrial booms, building modern cities, railways, and global trade networks, Russia was stuck in a medieval mess. The empire was still largely agrarian, underdeveloped, and divided by ethnic tensions. Dozens of minority groups, from Chechens to Poles, resisted Russian rule. Revolutionary groups like the Narodniks and the Social Democrats were beginning to rise, demanding radical change and fueling political instability. The empire's elite understood that trying to build colonies in Africa would require money, soldiers, and a stable government, things Russia simply didn't have. Every time it went to war, like in the Crimean War, it lost money, prestige, and manpower. These failures only deepened its internal problems. Furthermore, at the heart of every colonial empire stood a navy, not just as a symbol of strength, but as a lifeline to distant lands. Britain's Royal Navy was unmatched, casting a shadow over every ocean. France boasted a formidable maritime force that could sail to its colonies with ease. Even Belgium, with its tiny footprint in Europe, managed to command ships that maintained brutal control over the Congo. But Russia? It had no such reach. Its navy, while sizable, was built for defending coastal borders in the Baltic or Black Seas, not for conquering across oceans. But it's also true that if it really wanted to plunder African resources, achieving maritime superiority would never be a problem. The reason Russia never felt hunger for African resources was that it had its own resources. While Britain plundered Africa for rubber, cocoa, and palm oil, and France thirsted for uranium and cotton, Russia was sitting on a treasure chest of its own. The Russian Empire, spanning from Eastern Europe to the Pacific, was already one of the largest and resource-rich territories in the world. It didn't need to cross oceans to extract wealth. From the oil fields of Baku to the forests of Siberia, the grain-filled plains of Ukraine to the mineral veins in the Ural Mountains, Russia had access to nearly every natural resource it required. Western Europe, compact and resource-scarce, was driven to colonize out of necessity. But Russia's empire was so vast that it struggled more with managing what it had than needing more. Therefore, African conquest wasn't an economic lifeline. It was an unnecessary gamble. While others looked outward to survive, Russia looked inward to consolidate. However, despite the empire's general disinterest, not everyone in Russia agreed. Adventurers, nationalists, and Orthodox missionaries dreamed of an African chapter in Russia's imperial story. The most infamous of these was Nikolai Ashanov. In 1889, he took matters into his own hands, leading an unauthorized expedition to the Gulf of Tajura, where he declared a Russian colony and raised the flag over a small settlement. But Ashanov's dream was built on sand. The land was already claimed by France, and the French response was swift and merciless. Warships fired on the settlement, captured Ashanov's party, and sent them packing. Rather than defend its citizens or stake a claim, the Russian government disavowed the entire affair. Unlike Britain or France, who would have doubled down, Russia interpreted failure as a sign that Africa wasn't worth the fight. Today, this historical fact matters. African nations still carry the trauma of European colonization, and these wounds often shape how they view the West. But Russia? It's not entangled in that past. It doesn't show up in African history books as a master or a thief. And in a world where African nations are reclaiming agency and building new partnerships, Russia's absence from colonial atrocities has become a powerful diplomatic credential. Russia's absence spared it from the stain that haunts many of today's Western powers in Africa. It never took African gold, never trafficked in African labor, never ruled African lands. And as Moscow returns to the continent today, not as a colonizer but as a strategic partner, that absence becomes an advantage. It's not coming back to make amends. It never harmed in the first place. Russia's empty seat at the Berlin Conference wasn't just the result of bad timing or bad ships. It reflected a broader reality that it never wanted to exploit Africa. Russia intentionally stayed out of Africa's darkest chapter, and that may be its greatest asset today. That one empty chair in 1884 is now the seat from which Russia might build a new kind of partnership, one not based on conquest, but on cooperation. What do you think? Can Africa trust Russia like a true friend and ally? Isn't it true that European countries and the USA try to paint Russia as bad, and the reality is quite the opposite? In the comment section below, share your thoughts on
What would happen if a small, landlocked African nation formed an alliance with one of the most isolated governments in the world, tipping the scales in an already unstable region? Burkina Faso's re-established diplomatic ties with North Korea present important issues of sovereignty, military might, and the struggle for independence in a world where international alliances have the power to create or break nations. This audacious action, spearheaded by Ibrahim Traore, the leader of Burkina Faso, marks a radical change in the country's foreign policy, one that rejects Western influence and aims to forge a new future via military cooperation. The full ramifications of this partnership are still unknown as Burkina Faso negotiates the unpredictable world political landscape. However, one thing is evident. It's more than just a show of support. It's revolutionary. But why is Burkina Faso of interest to North Korea? A modest but important diplomatic move in March 2023 garnered international and African attention. Burkina Faso declared that diplomatic ties with North Korea would be restored. There was more to this surprising declaration than a mere political formality. Ibrahim Traore's administration made a bold move that marked a change in Burkina Faso's foreign policy. This move sparked criticism and raised eyebrows in the West for a government that had cut off relations with Pyongyang in 2017 because of international sanctions. Why would Burkina Faso decide to re-establish ties with one of the most isolated and contentious regimes in the world at this time, when it is already dealing with a number of internal and external issues? We must comprehend the larger background of Burkina Faso's location in a geopolitically unstable area, as well as the key elements affecting Traore's approach in order to respond to this question. The Sahel region of West Africa has long been a hotbed of insurgency, with extremist organizations gaining ground in a number of nations, including Burkina Faso. Having inherited a country at war with extremist organizations, Traore, who came to power in a military coup in 2022, found it difficult to hold onto power. Burkina Faso had few practical options because of this security void, mounting Western pressure, and the absence of significant backing from long-standing allies. African leaders are now looking for alternate strategies to protect their security and sovereignty as a result of the West's emphasis on military operations in the area, which are frequently condemned for their inefficiency and unfavorable results. Restoring relations with North Korea was therefore more than just a show of defiance. It was a well-thought-out reaction to the urgent security requirements of Burkina Faso. Notwithstanding its isolation and the severity of international sanctions, North Korea has a long history of offering military aid to nations in need of defensive support. This has involved providing many countries, especially those attempting to stave off Western influence, with weapons, training, and military know-how. North Korea provided a chance for Traore, who sought to bolster Burkina Faso's defenses against armed insurgents and establish his authority. In light of Burkina Faso's growing security concerns, the restoration of diplomatic relations made it possible to obtain military hardware, including weapons, training, and possibly even strategic counsel. Another obvious sign of Burkina Faso's wish to escape the sway of established Western powers is its decision to turn to North Korea. Burkina Faso's sovereignty had frequently felt threatened in an area ruled by former colonial powers like France, and with the United States gaining power through aid and military partnerships. With a primary focus on counterinsurgency operations and foreign military presence, the West's approach to African security has frequently prioritized strategic goals over the actual welfare of the populace. By restoring ties with Pyongyang, Traore's administration is making a statement. Burkina Faso is determined to avoid becoming entangled in the web of Western interests. The collaboration with North Korea is a component of a larger plan to lessen Burkina Faso's need on Western assistance and diversify its international partnerships. Furthermore, Traore wasn't alone in his determination to re-establish relations with North Korea. The leader's action demonstrated a deep-seated desire to secure the nation's survival and autonomy in the face of escalating domestic turmoil and regional instability. An encouraging example of resistance was provided by North Korea, which has managed to preserve its sovereignty in the face of decades of international isolation and sanctions. It showed how a nation might handle international politics without caving in to outside pressure, and Traore probably found this tenacity appealing. Joining forces with a country like North Korea, which has a strong military posture and a history of offering military support, looked like a sensible move to bolster Burkina Faso's defenses given the threat to its territorial integrity. Traore was ready to take on such issues, even though the Western media swiftly characterized the diplomatic thaw as a step that would further isolate Burkina Faso. Burkina Faso's leadership appeared to be growing more and more irritated with the failure of previous partnerships, and the nation's need on foreign money and Western military support has decreased in recent years. By forming an alliance with North Korea, Burkina Faso demonstrated its independence and refused to let outside forces dictate its security, re-establishing diplomatic ties with Pyongyang. Although the move was risky, Traore made sure Burkina Faso had at least one partner ready to provide useful, non-judgmental support for its security needs. Add your voice to the total liberation of Africa by leaving a comment in the comments section below. Do not forget to like and subscribe for more informative videos like this one. Let's proceed. Further economic sanctions and diplomatic isolation from Western countries could result from engaging with North Korea. However, the costs of sanctions might have seemed insignificant in comparison to the obvious advantages of military backing for a nation already dealing with internal strife and an unrelenting insurgency. The leaders of Burkina Faso were aware that they were risking their standing in the international community, but they could not afford to lose. For them, the state's continued existence and the defense of its citizens against the escalating prospect of insurrection constituted the true risk. In that regard, more valuable than any diplomatic repercussions was the possibility of military collaboration with North Korea. Burkina Faso's changing relationship with the international world was also reflected in the re-establishment of links. It is important to remember that this realignment with North Korea occurred at a period when African nations were generally growing more assertive in their foreign policy, even though the West may have denounced the action. Traore and Burkina Faso sent a strong message. Without being forced to adopt Western political structures or principles, African countries ought to be free to choose their allies and pursue what is best for their sovereignty. In summary, repairing diplomatic relations between Burkina Faso and North Korea involves more than a simple political ploy. It is an indication of Burkina Faso's resolve to safeguard its future. Traore is putting Burkina Faso in a position to become more autonomous by enlisting North Korea's assistance. Additionally, the ruling directly challenges the established power structures in Africa and the global community. The partnership with North Korea might be a lifeline and a sign of defiance as the situation in Burkina Faso develops, opening the door for a new era in the nation's history. The advantages of Burkina Faso's association with North Korea, however, are very obvious and include military assistance, cutting-edge technology, and the opportunity to break away from Western influence. What North Korea stands to gain by backing Ibrahim Traore's regime in Burkina Faso is still an open subject. Alliances are rarely one-sided in the intricate realm of international affairs. The relationship between Burkina Faso and North Korea includes more than just military support. This strategic alliance supports Pyongyang's larger geopolitical objectives and provides a number of important advantages. First, it's critical to recognize that North Korea is a very isolated state that is subject to the most severe sanctions enforced by the US, the EU, and the UN. Maintaining strong alliances and engaging in traditional commercial interactions have become more challenging for the nation due to its economic and diplomatic isolation. But for a long time, North Korea has depended on unorthodox partnerships with nations that are likewise isolated or attempting to overthrow Western authority. The ideal partner in this situation is Burkina Faso, which Pyongyang finds appealing as it is not only open to interacting with North Korea, but also stands to benefit greatly from it. The chance to increase its diplomatic clout on the African continent is among the biggest advantages of North Korea's backing of Traore. Africa has long been a region of interest for superpowers like China, the US, and the EU due to its abundance of resources and advantageous location. North Korea can establish a foothold in an area where it has traditionally had little involvement by developing deeper connections with an African country like Burkina Faso. Although individual African nations and the African Union, AU, have generally maintained a neutral or even benevolent stance toward North Korea, The AU's relationship with Burkina Faso suggests that North Korea is not as isolated as it may seem. By backing Burkina Faso, North Korea is able to offset the diplomatic pressure from Western nations. It goes beyond simply giving Burkina Faso technological or military support. The goal is to form partnerships that will assist North Korea in navigating a world that is increasingly considering it to be a rogue state. By providing Burkina Faso with assistance, by proving that it still has allies who are prepared to support it, despite their relative insignificance on the international scene, North Korea solidifies its place in the global geopolitical arena. Aside from that, North Korea has a large and sophisticated military-industrial complex that is focused on creating a variety of weapons, including small guns, missile systems, and cyber warfare technologies. Even though sanctions have limited its economy, the nation nevertheless has a sizable military production capability, which it has attempted to use through exports, frequently to nations that are similarly economically or politically isolated to itself. Pyongyang can now transfer military hardware to a country that desperately needs weapons and technology to combat the insurrection threatening its borders, thanks to Burkina Faso's decision to re-establish diplomatic ties with North Korea. Regarding North Korea, potentially profitable, the arms trade with Burkina Faso might supply much-needed funds for the country's nuclear weapons program or other domestic military initiatives. Furthermore, North Korea can get beyond the limitations imposed by UN sanctions by trading weapons to Africa. Even while sanctions have made it much more difficult for North Korea to trade internationally, it is still able to sell military hardware to nations that are either subject to sanctions or are prepared to resist pressure from other nations. Burkina Faso is a perfect client because of its urgent need for military support. North Korea gains strategically and economically from this arms trade, which solidifies its status as a major supplier of military hardware worldwide. This might eventually assist North Korea in negotiating comparable agreements with other nations in Asia or Africa. These provide a different market for its military exports and are similarly remote or unsatisfied with Western influence. Furthermore, North Korea's involvement with Burkina Faso is consistent with its larger geopolitical policy of extending its influence in areas where more established powers, like the United States and European countries, have been unable to establish their hegemony. Burkina Faso is situated in Africa's Sahel region, which is plagued by security issues, such as insurgencies, and is increasingly becoming a focus of global power struggles. A counter-narrative to the Western presence in the area is offered by North Korea's involvement, especially from former colonial countries like France. Supporting Traore and Burkina Faso gives North Korea the chance to establish a presence in West Africa, which is home to vital resources and commercial routes. Countries like Burkina Faso may seek alternatives as the West's influence in Africa starts to decline as a result of growing disenchantment with military operations and economic alliances. And North Korea hopes to establish itself as a major actor in this change. North Korea is creating the framework for future alliances with other African nations that could also wish to break away from Western meddling by backing Burkina Faso. Beyond the obvious military advantages, Pyongyang has a great chance to test and improve its military technologies in actual battle scenarios because to North Korea's collaboration with Burkina Faso. North Korean military technologies can be used and seen in operation in the context of the continuing conflict in Burkina Faso. Whether it's the functionality of sophisticated cyber warfare tools, surveillance apparatus, or missile systems, the Sahelian conflict offers North Korea a comparatively low-risk environment in which to hone its military capabilities in real-world combat situations. In this way, the partnership between Burkina Faso and North Korea turns into a kind of experimentation, where both parties gain from the sharing of military technology, knowledge, and skills. It is obvious that North Korea is interested in this trade. The more effectively its tactics and equipment work in Burkina Faso, the more appealing it is to other countries looking for comparable military solutions. the potential to weaken Western dominance in Africa, a continent that has frequently served as a battlefield for international power battles, is another important reason for North Korea's backing of Burkina Faso. North Korea fortifies its position as a counterweight to the United States and European countries by forming an alliance with a nation that actively aims to resist Western influence. The economic, diplomatic, and North Korea's military assistance to Burkina Faso poses a threat to the Western-led world order, which frequently tries to force its political system and ideals on African countries. Pyongyang sees this collaboration as more than merely assisting an African nation with self-defense. It also aims to deliver a blow to the Western system, which has been criticizing its government for many years. By giving Burkina Faso this kind of backing, North Korea is letting the West know that it is still a force to be reckoned with, capable of forming alliances and influencing world politics in ways that go against the grain. Therefore, North Korea's assistance to Burkina Faso is not a one-sided situation. But without Western meddling, nothing occurs in Africa. Although Burkina Faso's alliance with North Korea is largely viewed as a practical step to obtain military assistance and strengthen the nation's defenses, there are serious economic and diplomatic risks associated with it. Western countries and international organizations have criticized Burkina Faso's decision to associate with one of the most isolated and divisive regimes in the world, casting doubt on the country's long-term standing in the global community. Under Ibrahim Traore's leadership, Burkina Faso faces a challenging future ahead. Despite the military and strategic advantages, the country's recent alliance with North Korea poses a number of risks and challenges that will influence Burkina Faso's future for years to come. In the face of growing insurgency, political isolation, and diplomatic pressure from the West, Burkina Faso's decision to work with one of the most ostracized regimes in the world could either usher in a new era of sovereignty and self-reliance or send the nation into even more chaos. Will Burkina Faso's independence be genuinely protected by this contentious relationship, or will it result in more intricate and hazardous entanglements? Ibrahim Traore's leadership of Burkina Faso is unwavering despite ongoing Western criticism, especially from former colonial powers and international organizations like the United Nations. Traore has a clear vision for Burkina Faso, despite the fact that many have questioned his decision to join with North Korea. He is unaffected by the demands of Western condemnation or action. According to Traore, the way to national sovereignty, security, and independence is to steer clear of the traps of conventional Western alliances and look for partnerships based on practical, shared interests. Even North Korea has taken notice of and supported his leadership, which has come to represent defiance and strategic independence. A nation with identical goals of independence and opposition to outside influence. Western nations, especially those who see Ibrahim Traore's actions as a danger to the current international order, have harshly criticized him since he came to office. The United States, the European Union, and others have condemned the resumption of diplomatic relations with North Korea in particular, viewing Pyongyang as a pariah state and a danger to international stability. These nations, who have traditionally set the parameters for African security and progress, anticipated that Burkina Faso would stay in their circle and depend on their financial, military, and humanitarian assistance. But in his pragmatic approach, Traore has decided to go in a different direction. He acknowledges that the Western-led structures that have dominated Burkina Faso's growth for many years have not been able to address the underlying issues facing the nation, particularly both economic stagnation and insurgency. Burkina Faso has made a deliberate choice to break free from the limitations of Western assistance, military operations, and political expectations by engaging with North Korea. The real objective, according to Traore, is to create a powerful, independent Burkina Faso free from outside influence, especially those with a track record of meddling and exploitation. Western countries' unrelenting criticism simply makes Traore more determined. He views diplomatic isolation and sanctions as unavoidable outcomes of opposing the West's hegemony rather than as threats. Such criticism, in his opinion, is just evidence that Burkina Faso is headed in the right direction, rejecting the status quo and pursuing a future with greater autonomy. The foundation of Traore's leadership is the idea that independence encompasses more than just political freedom. This is also about military and economic independence. His pursuit of alternative alliances, like the one with North Korea, which provides Burkina Faso with the means to defend itself and assert its sovereignty, is motivated by this vision. It is no accident that North Korea has chosen to side with Burkina Faso. It reflects the objectives that Traore and the North Korean government have in common. Similar to Burkina Faso, North Korea has traditionally rejected Western meddling and influence in favor of forging its own course in spite of severe international sanctions and diplomatic isolation. Their alliance is based on this shared understanding. Supporting Burkina Faso is more than just giving military assistance or establishing a presence in Africa for North Korea. The goal is to strengthen a worldwide narrative of opposition to Western imperialism. North Korea identifies with Burkina Faso's struggle in many respects. Under Kim Jong-un, the country's leadership has resisted pressure from the US and other Western countries for years. North Korea is a state that is committed to maintaining its sovereignty at any costs, as seen by its isolationist policies, military buildup, and nuclear program. It was considered a logical progression of this common worldview when Burkina Faso, under Traore, chose to turn away from Western influence and look for North Korea as an ally. Despite its isolation, North Korea has shown a willingness to back countries that are opposing Western hegemony in a similar way. North Korea increases its influence in a strategically significant area of the world and fortifies its relationship with a nation that shares its principles by providing military assistance to Burkina Faso. The alliance challenges the idea that African countries must submit to the demands of Western-led institutions and past colonial rulers by enabling both states to stand up to dominating Western powers. Given this, Traore's actions are not just calculated moves. Rather, they are audacious declarations of support for other countries vying for independence. Burkina Faso is now a desirable partner for North Korea because of his leadership, which has established the nation as a major actor in the worldwide war for sovereignty. By working together, both countries support the notion that opposing outside influence is a valid strategy for states looking to control their own destiny. Do you think the West ever had the best interest of Africa at heart? Tell us what you think in the comments section below. That were formerly under French. Imagine putting in a lot of effort during the year to acquire money for your nation, only to be informed that half of it must be shipped abroad before the remainder is even useful. Doesn't that sound unfair? That's precisely what has been occurring for decades in a number of African countries. This is how it operates. A system known as the CFA franc has mandated that many African nations, particularly those that were formerly under French colonial control, deposit 50% of their foreign exchange reserves in France. And you know what? This reserve is mostly held in gold rather than merely cash. Simply put, these nations generate income, but half of it must be sent to France before it can be used to construct roads, schools, or hospitals. They must rely on the remaining half to survive. It doesn't stop there though. Additionally, some African countries have been keeping their gold reserves with the Federal Reserve Bank of New York in the United States. Why? Due to the fact that after accruing significant debt from organizations such as the International Monetary Fund, They were compelled by the IMF and the World Bank to pledge their gold as security for the loans they took out. The starting thing is that the gold has never been given back. Imagine the frustration now. Instead of prospering, nations are caught in a vicious circle of debt, lack of access to their own resources, and little influence over their financial future. However, a significant event is taking place. Burkina Faso's leader, Ibrahim Traore, is taking decisive action to regain control of his nation's foreign exchange and gold reserves. He's not by himself either. Which other nations are joining him is the true question. In what way is this taking place? What is the response from the West? Let's take a quick look back to learn about the history of this system and its purpose before we get started. France didn't simply up and depart when numerous African countries became independent. Rather, it established a framework to maintain financial authority over its former colonies. The currency used by 14 African nations divided into two groupings is known as the CFA franc. The West African Economic and Monetary Union comprises Guinea-Bissau, Benin, Ivory Coast, Burkina Faso, Senegal, Togo, Niger, and Mali. CEMEC stands for Central African Economic and Monetary Community, comprises Gabon, Equatorial Guinea, Cameroon, the Central African Republic, Chad, and the Republic of the Congo. These nations' autonomy to make their own economic decisions is nonetheless constrained by the structure that binds them to France's financial policies. However, this is where things are beginning to shift. Imagine having a wallet full of cash, but having to get permission from someone else each time you want to spend it. Additionally, they typically say no. That's precisely what has been taking place to a number of African nations for many years. These countries do not genuinely control their own money, despite having their own central banks. This is the reason. These nations are required by a French-instituted mechanism to transfer to the French treasury at least half of their foreign exchange reserves. This implies that half of Africa's wealth is locked away in Paris, totally out of their grasp, before they can even use it for infrastructure like roads, schools, or hospitals. And it gets worse. The majority of this reserve is kept in gold rather than currency, but not in African vaults. In France, not in their own banks. Because of this arrangement, a significant portion of the wealth created by African farmers, laborers, and companies was never retained in their home nations. Instead, it infiltrated France's economy covertly, ensuring that France remained wealthy while Africa continued to be reliant. However, that was just one aspect of the strategy. Although African economies were already bound to France by this financial system, the CFA franc system, the actual exploitation took place in relation to gold. You see, a lot of African nations have enormous reserves of gold. Among the top producers of gold worldwide are Mali, Burkina Faso, and Côte d'Ivoire. You believe that their people would benefit as a result. Not exactly. Long before it could be tallied, taxed, or utilized for regional development, this gold was automatically sent to Paris rather than helping their own countries. How did France manage to do this? They first made sure that French businesses controlled the gold mining sector in Africa. These businesses paid very little for the enormous amounts of gold they extracted. Therefore, the majority of the gold was gone before governments could claim a portion. Second, France said that in order to ensure the stability of their currency, these countries had to keep whatever gold reserves they did have in Paris. Here's the catch though. Without France's consent, African countries were unable to obtain or utilize this treasure. Imagine putting in a lot of effort each day only to discover that your money is in someone else's bank account and that you are unable to access it. These African countries have been dealing with that reality for many years. To make matters worse, France created the CFA franc to be inextricably linked to its own currency. It was first based on the French franc and then the euro. African economies were therefore completely rigid. Decisions taken in Europe, not by their own governments, determined the value of their currency. These nations had more than simply a currency they were unable to fully control. Additionally, they lacked the authority to control their own financial policies or change its worth. Leaders were prohibited right away if they attempted to use their nation's gold holdings to boost their own economy. However, this was not only unjust, it was also a means of maintaining the dependence of African countries. A framework created to ensure they would never be able to fully escape France's control. And there were severe repercussions for anyone who ventured to question it. For instance, Thomas Sankara. During his tenure as president of Burkina Faso in the 1980s, Sankara had a visionary idea. He aspired for his nation to achieve full financial and political independence. He aspired to nationalize gold mining, demanded the restoration of Burkina Faso's gold reserves, and even had plans to create a currency independent of France. He wasn't only chatting either. Sankara declined to accept loans from the IMF and World Bank, which frequently kept nations mired in debt, in contrast to other African leaders. He was an issue because of that. He was terminated in a coup in 1987 under the leadership of Blaise Compaoré, who had French support. Compaoré destroyed all Sankara stood for as soon as he came to power. The economy reverted to French authority, the gold remained in French vaults, and Burkina Faso was once more forced to operate under the same framework from which Sankara had attempted to break out. However, there were others that retaliated as well. Former Côte d'Ivoire President Laurent Gbagbo was another leader who attempted to escape. Gbagbo thought that rather than sitting in French banks and enriching France, his nation's gold should be used to improve Côte d'Ivoire. He publicly questioned the need for a sovereign nation to keep its wealth in another nation. That did not sit well with France. Gbagbo was suddenly charged with electoral fraud. And things took a startling turn in 2011. He was overthrown by French troops, who also turned him over to the International Criminal Court. He was suddenly removed, and France ensured that a pro-French commander, who would refrain from interrogating him, was appointed in his place. Due to their political, economic, and even military ties to the West, African countries found it difficult to resist for many years. The system was about control as much as it was about money. Leaders like Abdourahmane Tiani of Niger, Ibrahim Traore of Burkina Faso, and Assimi Goïta of Mali are taking decisive action to restore their nation's economic independence. Expelling French troops and dismantling long-standing military pacts that placed them under foreign rule was one of their first significant actions. However, this conflict is about more than just military presence. It's also about power, wealth, and resources. These countries are demanding the restoration of their gold reserves since France is no longer in charge. Gold that has been stored for years in vaults across Europe. They're not going to stop there either. Moving away from antiquated currencies that bound them to Western interests, they are investigating banking systems backed by gold. They are not alone in their bold declaration of economic independence, which goes beyond a simple change in policy. Nigeria and other African countries are taking action on their own. Nigeria has begun to withdraw its gold holdings from foreign institutions, in part because of worries about the US financial system's volatility. Global powerhouses like China and Russia are supporting Africa's quest for economic independence in the meantime. By urging African countries to abandon Western-controlled financial systems and adopt gold-backed currencies, the BRICS alliance has been working to create a world where states trade independently of the US currency. This change is having a significant impact on the French economy. France is in severe financial problems if African resources aren't supporting it. And for that reason, they're doing everything they can to halt this trend. In an attempt to bring about economic instability and compel Mali and Burkina Faso to return to the previous system, they have already begun economic blackmail by stopping financial aid to these countries. However, it doesn't end there. In an effort to defend sanctions, political pressure, or perhaps upcoming military incursions, Western media has started a smear campaign, portraying leaders such as Ibrahim Traore and Assimi Goïta as autocrats. Furthermore, there is rising fear that France may attempt another coup in Africa given their lengthy history of doing so, particularly in Mali or Burkina Faso. However, France is not the only country that has influence on Africa's wealth. Africa's gold reserves have long been held in the United States, specifically at the Federal Reserve Bank of New York, in addition to being sequestered in France. Although it may appear like African nations voluntarily kept their gold there, the reality is far more sinister. These countries had no actual say in the matter. Their reliance on the World Bank and International Monetary Fund compelled them to make this deal. Two organizations that have been crucial in maintaining the debt trap in African nations. The system was created to keep African countries under Western domination, borrowing, and struggling. However, that structure is now being questioned for the first time in decades. Imagine having to borrow money from someone who sets all the regulations and makes sure you never completely escape their control in order to build roads, schools, or hospitals. What occurred to many African countries was just that. These nations had to rely on international financial organizations like the International Monetary Fund whenever they needed money for development, economic stabilization, or even the provision of fundamental public services. However, these were not your typical loans. They had significant conditions attached. These lenders' requirements ensured that Africa will continue to be financially reliant. These loans bound nations to policies that undermined their economies, kept them in debt, and made them susceptible to outside influence rather than letting them develop on their own terms. Worst of all, repayment was intended to be practically unattainable. Africa's economic subjugation was maintained by the cycle of borrowing, struggling, and borrowing again. Add your voice to the total liberation of Africa by leaving a comment in the comments section below. Do not forget to like and subscribe for more informative videos like this one. Let's proceed. Consider a game in which you are up against the odds from the beginning.
Love, fam.
Regardless of your efforts, the rules are always shifting in favor of those in authority. Many African countries were ensnared in a financial system that was intended to keep them reliant, struggling, and under control. Currency devaluation was one of the main strategies employed against them. Trade with the rest of the world became more difficult as a result of countries being obliged to devalue their own currency. As a result, the African economy remained at the bottom of the world economy and was constantly at a disadvantage. However, that was only the start. Additionally, governments faced pressure to reduce spending on essential services like infrastructure, healthcare, and education. Not because African countries didn't want to grow, but rather because they were told they couldn't afford it under the terms of their loans, which is why schools collapsed, clinics were underfunded, and roads remained unpaved. Then followed the most significant theft ever. State-owned businesses including mining, telecommunications, and electricity had to be sold off by African governments for astronomically low rates. However, can you guess who purchased them? Companies in the West. African countries ultimately lost control over their own resources and industries in addition to financial losses. They were assured that this would only last temporarily and that the gold would be given back as soon as their economies strengthened. That never took place. African nations faced insurmountable legal obstacles any time they attempted to recover their own gold, even after they had paid off their loans. Because of the way the agreements were drafted, it was practically impossible to escape debt. It was more than just getting loans. The majority of the gold that African countries had to physically ship to the US ended up in the Federal Reserve Bank of New York. They were assured that this would only last temporarily and that the gold would be given back as soon as their economies strengthened. That never took place. African nations faced insurmountable legal obstacles any time they attempted to recover their own gold, even after they had paid off their loans. Because of the way the agreements were drafted, it was practically impossible to escape debt. New financial obstacles would come out of nowhere if a nation was able to pay its debts trapping it in a never-ending cycle of dependency. As long as Western financial institutions maintained their dominance, this structure made guaranteed that money kept leaving Africa. Keeping African countries in line and making them adopt economic policies that favored the West at their expense was more important than simply making money. However, things are changing. African countries are retaliating for the first time in decades. To recover their treasure, leaders from all around the continent are taking decisive action. A direct challenge to the West's financial domination. Fearing that the global financial system is becoming too unstable, nations like Nigeria have begun to remove their reserves from the US. Ghana is now making domestic gold storage a top priority in an effort to fortify its currency and lessen its dependency on foreign lenders such as the IMF. A major BRICS country, South Africa, has been gradually increasing its gold reserves in the meantime, indicating a long-term strategy to wean itself off of the US currency. In an effort to take charge of its economy and lessen outside influence, Egypt, a significant economic force, has also started moving its reserves. This is a revolutionary change that has the potential to upend the world financial system. It is not just about transporting gold from one location to another. Ibrahim Traore, the youthful and bold leader of Burkina Faso, is at the vanguard of a financial revolution that is taking place throughout Africa. Traore isn't requesting permission, in contrast to many previous African leaders who were hesitant to squarely address financial reliance on the West. He's doing something about it. His audacious choices since taking office in 2022 have rocked Western establishments and sparked an economic nationalism movement throughout Africa. His initial action involved expelling French troops and dismantling military pacts that let foreign powers to control Burkina Faso's security strategies. Now that France was out of the picture, Traore focused on Burkina Faso's gold, which was even more significant. African countries have been reliant on foreign-controlled financial systems for decades, since they are forced to keep their gold and other financial reserves in Western institutions. Traore's recovery of this treasure is a strong example for the rest of Africa, and other nations are imitating him. Recent overthrows of pro-French regimes in Mali and Niger are supporting Traore's goal of an independent Africa free from foreign economic hegemony. African nations uniting against Western financial dominance is currently taking place, which appeared unthinkable at the time. And Paris and Washington are really concerned about this. Returning gold home may appear to be merely another financial choice, but it actually represents a direct threat to the decades-long dominance of African economies by Western nations. Gold reserves are more than just assets. Organizations like the World Bank and IMF have used them as leverage to pressure African nations into adopting Western-friendly policies. African countries are exempt from those regulations if they own their own gold. Furthermore, it doesn't end there. The US dollar's hegemony is also being threatened by this movement. Many of the nations who are returning their gold, including Egypt, Nigeria, South Africa, and others, are either BRICS members or looking to join. A currency backed by gold has been actively developed by the BRICS alliance, which would upend the pillars of Western financial dominance. If this new system works, it might lessen the world's reliance on the US currency, which Washington cannot afford to overlook. Furthermore, history demonstrates that the West never simply watches while African countries attempt to regain control over their own wealth. The stakes are extremely high as the fight for Africa's financial independence intensifies. The likelihood of Western reprisal is growing as more African countries demand the return of their gold. History demonstrates that African leaders face a fast and brutal response when they attempt to escape financial control. Consider the case of Muammar Gaddafi. His aim was audacious: an African currency backed by gold that would liberate the continent from the financial hegemony of the West. However, his government was overthrown when NATO forces attacked Libya as soon as he moved forward with his plan. Abdourahmane Tiani, Assimi Goïta, and Ibrahim Traore are now spearheading a fresh effort to recover Africa's riches. However, they run the risk of encountering the same strategies that have previously been employed to thwart African independence with each step they take toward financial sovereignty. Sanctions, political meddling, economic pressure, and even military action are all possibilities. History has shown that the West won't give up easily, and they stand to lose too much if Africa manages its own resources. However, things feel different this time. Regaining control is more important than economics when it comes to the decision to repatriate gold. The goal is to end financial slavery and ensure that Africa's wealth is used for its own people rather than foreigners. How far will the West go to halt this movement, one wonders? Will they attempt to employ economic blackmail and sanctions? Will they try to overthrow governments that don't comply? Or will they resort to even more extreme tactics, such as planning military actions? Africa is no longer waiting for approval, that much is certain. African leaders are confronting a system that has kept the continent in subjection for the first time in decades. Abdourahmane Tiani, Assimi Goïta, and Ibrahim Traore are now spearheading a fresh effort to recover Africa's riches. However, they run the risk of encountering the same strategies that have previously been employed to thwart African independence: sanctions, political meddling, economic pressure, and even military intervention, with each step they take toward financial sovereignty. History has shown that the West won't give up easily, and they stand to lose too much if Africa manages its own resources. However, things feel different this time. Regaining control is more important than economics when it comes to the decision to repatriate gold. The goal is to end financial slavery and ensure that Africa's wealth is used for its own people rather than foreigners. How far will the West go to halt this movement, one wonders? Will they attempt to employ economic blackmail and sanctions? Will they try to overthrow governments that don't comply? Or will they resort to even more extreme tactics, such as planning military actions? Africa is no longer waiting for approval, that much is certain. African leaders are confronting a system that has kept the continent in subjection for the first time in decades. Reliant on money for many generations, Africa's riches will remain in Africa as the old order disintegrates and a new era dawns. Will other nations, however, follow Burkina Faso's example, or will they continue to be caught in the circle of international domination? More importantly, should all African countries demand that the West return their gold and reserves? Instead of being ruled by foreign powers, isn't it time for Africa's wealth to be in the hands of its own people? Tell us what you think in the comments section below.
Imagine being able to stop a terrorist meeting with the push of a button, only to watch your $30 million military drone explode in mid-air, shot down not by terrorists but by your own neighbor. That's exactly what happened on April 1st, 2025, when Algeria shuts down Turkish-made Malian drone near their shared border. But here is what no mainstream media is telling you. This wasn't about airspace. It was the moment a decades-long alliance crumbled and potentially set the stage for Africa's next war, unfortunately.
Tensions are peaking in the Sahel region,
Algeria and Mali.
Entre Alger et Bamako.
Welcome back to the Strategic Lens family. I am Asong Wedris, and today we are exposing a geopolitical powder keg that is about to explode in North Africa. Mali and Algeria share a 1,300-kilometer border across the Sahara Desert. For decades, they were brothers, with Algeria playing mentor, protector, and gateway to the Mediterranean for Mali. But something has changed when Algeria shut down the Malian drone. Mali didn't just protest, they called Algeria an exporter of terrorism and filed international complaints for an act of aggression. What turns allies into enemies? And more importantly, who benefits from these conflicts? The answers involve billion-dollar oil rigs and a strategy of controlled chaos that's about to backfire spectacularly. Let's break down what really happened on April 1st, 2025. A Malian Akinci drone, one of only two recently purchased from Turkey at $30 million each, was tracking terrorist leaders near Tinzaouatin, close to the Algerian border. According to Mali, the drone was 9.5 kilometers inside the Malian territory when the Algerian authorities shot it down with a surface-to-air missile. Algeria, on the other hand, claimed the drone had crossed 2 kilometers into their airspace. But here is the first red flag. If the drone was 2 kilometers in Algeria when shot down, why did its wreckage land 9.5 kilometers in Malian territory? The location matters because of what the drone was reportedly targeting. A high-level meeting of terrorist leaders, including figures Algeria has been accused of harboring. In just a moment, I will tell you why Algeria might want to protect these groups, and it has everything to do with gold, rare minerals, and the control of the Sahara. To understand today's crisis, we need to rewind. The Tuareg people migrated from Libya and Algeria in the 17th century. They are light-skinned Berber nomads who lived across the Sahara for centuries. When European colonial powers drew borders, the Tuareg found themselves scattered across Mali, Algeria, Niger, Libya, and Burkina Faso. Have you ever wondered what happens when colonial borders ignore ethnic realities? Since Mali's independence in 1960, Tuareg rebels have launched multiple uprisings seeking autonomy or independence for northern Mali, an area they call Azawad. They want to cut part of Mali and call it their own. The conflict reached a boiling point in 2012 when Tuareg rebels seized northern Mali. But the situation quickly complicated when jihadist groups hijacked their movements. France intervened with Operation Serval, driving back extremists in 2013. Then Algeria stepped in as peacemaker, brokering the 2015 Algiers Peace Accord between Mali's government and northern rebels. But then many Malians saw this accord as a threat to their sovereignty, essentially dividing their country, and they increasingly suspected Algeria's motives weren't entirely pure. Everything changed in 2021 when Colonel Assimi Goïta seized power in Mali through a military coup. Unlike previous Malian leaders who depended on France for aid, Goïta made a controversial decision. He drove France away and welcomed a new partner, that is Russia, who came with Wagner mercenaries to help fight the insurgency. This move infuriated France and Algeria, but for two different reasons, and what happened next revealed the true nature of Algeria's game. In late 2023, Mali's forces with Russian support recaptured Kidal, a key northern city that had been a Tuareg stronghold for years. This was a massive victory for Mali's sovereignty. But if Algeria truly wanted stability in Mali, wouldn't they celebrate this victory against insurgency in Mali? Instead, something curious happened. According to Malian officials, when their army took Kidal, many rebel leaders fled across the border to Algeria. Mali accused Algeria of harboring these fighters, effectively functioning as a rare base for groups planning attacks on Mali. Now, think about it. Algeria wants Mali protector and mentor, potentially sheltering rebels against the Malian government. But why would they do this? The answer lies beneath the Sahara sands, literally. Mali ranks as Africa's third largest gold producer, but the real prize lies in the north. Near the Algerian border, vast deposits of iron, uranium, and critically rare earth minerals. The minerals essential for everything from smartphones to electric vehicles. We are talking about resources worth billions of dollars that would power the next century of technology. What most people don't know is that Algeria's state-owned oil company, Sonatrach, was granted exploration rights in northern Mali's Touadéni Basin back in 2007, specifically in Block 20, an area rich in hydrocarbons and other resources. But here is what is suspicious. The results of these explorations were never shared with the public. Why would a company hide potentially profitable discoveries? Multiple intelligence reports suggest Algeria has deliberately maintained influence over northern Mali by leveraging instability, essentially delaying resource exploitation while keeping strategic control over these areas. But there's an even bigger game being played here, one that involves a $30 billion pipeline project and Algeria's most hated rival. And that rival is gaining grounds every single day that this conflict continues. While Algeria and Mali's relationship deteriorates, Morocco, Algeria's arch nemesis, is making strategic moves. Since February 2025, Morocco has established a first ever joint military commission with Mali. By April 2025, Morocco has trained 165 Malian paratroopers with plans of 500 more. You need to understand something very crucial. Algeria and Morocco have been bitter rivals since the 1970s, even closing their land border in 1994. Algeria and Morocco are so close, but then the land border is closed. You can't move from Algeria to Morocco freely. These two nations have competed for influence across Africa on all fronts. What happens when the ally you have taken for granted finds a new friend in your enemy? The Malian Prime Minister now calls Morocco a brother and border country, despite having no shared border. Meanwhile, Morocco's trade with Africa has reached $6 billion annually, while Algeria's economic outreach stagnates. With every diplomatic misstep, Algeria is watching its sphere of influence slip to Morocco. But then the stakes are about to get even higher. The crown jewel of Algeria's regional strategy is the Trans-Saharan gas pipeline, a $30 billion project designed to transport Nigerian gas through Niger and Algeria to European markets. For Algeria, whose economy depends on 90% of hydrocarbon exports, this pipeline is existential. As its own oil reserve depletes, partnering with Nigeria would ensure Algeria remains Europe's key energy supplier for decades. But Algeria just made a typical miscalculation that could derail the entire project. Remember, Mali isn't fighting alone. In 2023, Mali, Niger, and Burkina Faso formed the Alliance of Sahel States, which evolved into a confederation in 2024. They function as a unified bloc. An attack on one is an attack on all. What happens when you shoot down your pipeline partner's allies' drone? All three Sahel states immediately recalled their ambassadors from Algeria. Niger, the crucial transit country for the pipeline, now has every reason to reconsider this partnership. If Niger abandons the Trans-Saharan pipeline, they could partner with Nigeria on alternative routes, potentially through Morocco to the Atlantic. For Algeria, this is catastrophic. The situation has now reached a breaking point. After Algeria shot Mali's drone, Mali withdrew from regional security arrangements with Algeria. Mali accused Algeria of exporting terrorism. Both countries closed their airspace to each other. Mali filed complaints with international bodies. Algeria responded by calling Mali's leaders putschists and an unconstitutional mafia clique. We are witnessing a complete breakdown of diplomatic ties. The last time that Algeria took similar measures was against Morocco, and the relationship between Algeria and Morocco remains frozen till today. Military sources report that Algeria has deployed additional troops to the border region. Mali, backed by Wagner forces, continues operations against remaining rebel strongholds near the Algerian border. As Mali's military push continues, they are approaching areas where Algeria's Sonatrach has held exploration rights since 2007. Any military conflict will directly affect Algeria's interests in these resource-rich zones. This creates the perfect storm for an armed conflict. Mali's sovereign push isn't just political, it's about reclaiming control of their natural resources from foreign influence. Both Mali and Algeria are fighting for their economic futures. For Mali, controlling their northern resource wealth could transform their economy. For Algeria, losing privileged access to these resources threatens a critical source of hidden revenue and influence. What happens when two nations see the same conflict as existential to their future? The Mali-Algerian crisis represents something familiar between Rwanda and Congo. Division where unity is desperately needed. The Sahel faces challenges such as terrorism and climate change. These require collaboration, not conflict. Every diplomatic tie cut represents victory for those who want instability in Africa. As someone dedicated to African development, watching these historic allies turn into enemies is particularly painful. The winners won't be the people of Mali or Algeria, but external powers happy to exploit African divisions. So what do you think? Is Algeria justified in protecting its interests, or is Mali right to assert its sovereignty? And more importantly, what would a peaceful resolution look like? Let me know down in the comments below. I will be in the comments to read all the comments to this particular situation.
Hello ladies and gentlemen, what you see here, these are security cameras installed in the capital city of Ouagadougou in Burkina Faso. This comes after several assassination attempts to Captain Ibrahim Traore. The government has decided to install this security camera to make sure that they can monitor situation in the city. You remember that the guards of Captain Ibrahim Traore were offered almost $5 million to assassinate him, but they allegedly refused the bribe, and they shown commitment and patriotism after refusing that bribe. So before moving too far about this installation of cameras, let us now listen this short documentary about how these things happened.
In the heart of West Africa, a nation stands at a crossroads. A young leader defiant and unshaken, faces storm after storm. 19 assassination attempts, and yet he refuses to fall. This is the story of Captain Ibrahim Traore. This is the story of Burkina Faso. And this is the story of a continent awakening to its own strength. Born from the ashes of unrest, Captain Ibrahim Traore took power in September 2022, following a wave of political instability. At just 34, he became the world's youngest head of state, not through dynasty or privilege, but through bold action and revolutionary purpose. His rise was not welcomed by all. With Burkina Faso battling internal corruption, jihadist violence, and economic stagnation, Traore promised to reset the nation. He cut ties with former colonial powers, formed new alliances with Russia, and called for Pan-African unity. But great vision invites great resistance. Traore quickly found himself surrounded, not just by enemies abroad, but by betrayal within. Since 2022, there have been 19 confirmed assassination attempts against Traore. These were not random attacks. They were highly coordinated, involving military officers, political figures, and even activists tied to foreign interests. One major plot involved Lieutenant Colonel Paul-Henri Damiba, the former interim president Traore had overthrown. The plan: detonate explosives inside the presidential residence. Another attack came during a public appearance in Ouagadougou. Gunfire rang out. Chaos unfolded. Security swept in, shielding Traore as the crowd scattered. Yet again he emerged, alive and more determined than ever. These are not just assassination attempts. They are attacks on Burkina Faso's sovereignty, on its dream of self-determination. Traore's firm rejection of foreign domination, especially from France, has drawn global attention. Burkina Faso is rich in gold, zinc, and other resources. In the eyes of some global powers, that makes the country too important to be left to independent African control. Investigations have revealed that several coup attempts were allegedly backed by foreign funds, funneled into networks aiming to restore influence over Burkina Faso's leadership. But Traore refused to yield. Instead, he looked inward and toward other African nations. He formed a defensive alliance with Mali and Niger, creating a united front against foreign intervention and rebellion alike. In April 2025, following the latest assassination attempt, Traore's government launched the S-24/7 Security Initiative. Its goal to install round-the-clock surveillance across Ouagadougou and key cities. Thousands of CCTV cameras are now being deployed, monitored in real time by security teams trained to respond within seconds. The system uses facial recognition, license plate tracking, and AI-based alerts, all aimed at protecting national leadership and public safety. This move marks a major shift in African governance. It's not just about cameras, it's about sending a clear message. Burkina Faso will not fall. The surveillance initiative has sparked debate. Some critics call it authoritarian, a tool for controlling the population. Others argue it's a necessary evolution in a country targeted from within and without. But to many Burkina-based citizens, it is reassurance. After years of attacks and uncertainty, stability, even through a watchful eye, offers hope. It shows that their president is fighting not just for power, but for them. International reactions have been cautious. While the United Nations calls for peace, global powers remain silent, perhaps unsure how to navigate Traore's bold anti-colonial stance. Ibrahim Traore represents something deeper than just Burkina Faso. He is part of a wave of Pan-Africanist leaders rising across the continent. They are young, they are bold, and they are rejecting the old systems that kept Africa divided, dependent, and degraded. From Thomas Sankara to Patrice Lumumba, history has not been kind to revolutionary African leaders. Many were assassinated, many betrayed. But Traore's survival, again and again, could mark a turning point. He has said it clearly. Betrayal is now the most serious criminal act in Burkina Faso. That line speaks volumes. If there is one message Traore repeats, it's this: Africa must unite. Burkina Faso cannot fight its battles alone. The continent's struggles, from military coups to foreign exploitation, are shared struggles. That's why Traore's alliances with Mali and Niger are so critical. Together, they have created a tri-state defense pact. Their vision? A secure, self-reliant West Africa. This unity is what Sankara dreamed of. It's what Kwame Nkrumah fought for, and it's what Traore is trying to build. One policy, one speech, one surveillance camera at a time. To the young African watching this, your continent is not cursed, it is rising. Your leaders may be flawed, but many are fighting. Fighting for land, for dignity, for freedom. Burkina Faso is a mirror, reflecting Africa's pain, yes, but also its potential. In Captain Ibrahim Traore, we see resilience. In the people of Ouagadougou, we see courage. And in every failed assassination attempt, we see proof that the dream of African sovereignty is still alive. Stay awake, stay aware, stay proud. If this video moved you, share it. Tell someone what's happening in Burkina Faso. Spread the word that Africa is not broken. It is battling for greatness. Subscribe to Make Africa Great for more stories of African leadership, inspiration, and transformation. Hit the bell icon and join the movement to reshape the global narrative. This isn't just content. This is continental
with a single drone, silent, sleek, and high above the rugged Sahel landscape. For Mali, it was a vital eye in the sky, patrolling the volatile Tinzoutin border region. But for Algeria, it was an unacceptable intrusion, one that crossed both physical and political lines. On a quiet morning, Algerian forces shot it down. The wreckage fell just meters from the border, sparking a firestorm far bigger than the explosion on impact. Mali's military leadership responded immediately. In an emergency statement, they accused Algeria not only of shooting down sovereign surveillance equipment, but of waging a covert campaign of sabotage. Bamako went further, alleging that Algeria had long been sponsoring terrorist groups, an accusation that had simmered behind closed doors for years, but had never been said so publicly. Algeria, taken aback, dismissed the charges as unserious and inflammatory. But behind the stern words came action. Algiers swiftly banned all Malian flights from entering Algerian airspace. The tension, already high, suddenly escalated into a full-blown diplomatic crisis. Then came a stunning show of unity. Mali wasn't alone in this fight. Within hours, its closest allies, Burkina Faso and Niger, both members of the Alliance of Sahel States, AES, rallied behind it. The three AES nations announced the immediate withdrawal of their ambassadors from Algeria and issued a joint communiqué condemning what they described as hostile interference. It was a move that shocked the region and drew clear battle lines. In retaliation, Algeria closed its airspace to all three AES countries. What began as a drone incident had spiraled into the most severe diplomatic standoff between Algeria and Mali in recent memory. Embassy flags were taken down, flight paths were redrawn, and at the heart of it all was a growing question. Was this just a border dispute, or the beginning of something much larger? Drone animations, airspace maps, and flickering embassy flags tell part of the story. But behind these visuals lies a deeper tale of betrayal, history, and a regional power struggle decades in the making. And to understand that tale, we have to go back to the deserts of Azawad, to the rebellions of the past, and to the fragile peace that never quite held. To understand today's crisis, you have to go back, far beyond the fallen drone, before the military leaders and joint communiques, before AES even existed. You have to trace the scars etched deep into Mali's northern deserts, where the Tuareg people have long fought for a voice, and where the seeds of distrust between Bamako and Algiers were first sown. The vast region of Azawad, stretching across Mali's north, has always felt like a country within a country. Home to nomadic Tuareg communities, it has historically been marginalized by successive governments in Bamako. Decades of neglect, economic exclusion, and political invisibility eventually boiled over into armed rebellions, first in the 1990s, then again in 2006, and most dramatically in 2012. Each rebellion carried the same message: autonomy, dignity, and recognition. But it was the 2012 uprising that truly shattered Mali's fragile unity. Tuareg rebels, under the banner of the National Movement for the Liberation of Azawad, MNLA, declared independence. The Malian military, overwhelmed and fractured, quickly lost control of the north. Into this chaos stepped jihadi groups who hijacked the rebellion, imposing a brutal form of rule. What began as a fight for autonomy morphed into a crisis that nearly tore the nation apart. Before we continue, welcome to Izizi Africa, where we bring the African vision to life and make African stories go global. Help us in pushing the message forward as we continue to inspire, educate, and empower. Subscribe now, like, and share our videos, and don't forget to hit that notification bell for our next videos. Now let's continue. It was in this vacuum that Algeria emerged as a key player. For the Tuaregs, Algeria was a neighbor, a historic partner, and, at times, a sanctuary. Many rebel leaders had long-standing ties to Algiers. Some had even lived there. Algeria used its diplomatic clout to position itself as a mediator, brokering what became known as the 2015 Algiers Accord, an ambitious peace deal aimed at reintegrating northern Mali and resolving the long-standing grievances. But the accord was fragile, and Bamako always viewed Algeria's role with suspicion. While the Tuaregs trusted Algiers, many in Mali's capital felt Algeria was playing both sides, offering peace on paper, while quietly enabling the rebels to retain influence on the ground. The very fact that the rebels saw Algiers as a neutral party felt like an insult to Bamako's authority. In the years that followed, the Algiers Accord stagnated. Implementation was slow, mistrust lingered, and northern Mali remained unstable. Meanwhile, Mali's leaders grew increasingly bitter toward their northern neighbor. To them, Algeria was not a neutral arbiter, it was an enabler of division. This resentment only deepened as new power dynamics began to take shape in Mali itself. In August 2020, Mali's simmering political crisis reached a boiling point. A group of soldiers led by Colonel Assimi Goïta stormed the presidential palace and overthrew President Ibrahim Boubacar Keïta. It was a dramatic but widely supported move. Many Malians had grown disillusioned with the corruption and dysfunction of their civilian government. The coup was seen, not just as a power grab, but as a reset. Algeria had invested heavily in maintaining the post-2015 political order in Mali. That order may have been shaky, but it was predictable. The new military leaders represented uncertainty and a challenge to the framework Algeria had helped craft. At first, Algeria issued cautious statements, urging a return to civilian rule. But privately, its diplomats were already reassessing the regional balance of power. Over time, as Goïta tightened his grip, diplomatic relations between Bamako and Algiers frayed. What began as subtle tensions grew into visible frost. The military leaders distanced itself from France, ECOWAS, and Western powers, while Algeria remained a more traditional player, aligned with older regional structures. The ideological gap widened. Behind the scenes, Mali began accusing Algeria of engaging in back-channel talks with armed groups in the north, without Bamako's approval. To the military leaders, this was not mediation. It was meddling. It was a violation of sovereignty. Algeria, for its part, quietly feared the growing influence of Russia in Mali. The arrival of Wagner, now rebranded as the Africa Corps, signaled a new era of geopolitical rivalry. As Russian advisors entrenched themselves in Bamako and began joint operations with the Malian military, Algeria saw its strategic foothold in the Sahel shrinking. This wasn't just a diplomatic cold shoulder, It was a pivot that threatened to reshape the entire regional order. By 2023, relations between the two countries had deteriorated to near silence. The border remained tense. Intelligence was no longer shared. And in political circles, both governments began speaking openly of betrayal. The downed drone in 2025 didn't cause this crisis. It simply revealed how fragile the relationship had become, how close to the edge both nations already were. Now, with the Algiers Accord all but dead and the old diplomacy in tatters, a new regional force was emerging to fill the vacuum, the AES. And they were ready to do things very differently. While the world was watching Mali and Algeria lock horns over a drone, something far more consequential had already been set in motion. A regional realignment unlike anything the Sahel had seen in decades. Born out of isolation, punishment, and political defiance, the Alliance of Sahel States, AES for short, was not just a military pact. It was a political statement. In 2023, 3 countries, Burkina Faso, Mali, and Niger, had found themselves cut off by the West African bloc, ECOWAS, following military takeovers. Sanctions rained down. Borders were sealed. Aid was suspended. The message was clear: return to civilian rule or face the consequences. Instead, they turned toward one another. Out of shared struggle and shared vision, the AES was born. More than just a response to ECOWAS, it was a declaration of independence from decades of foreign interference, failed promises, and neo-colonial pressure. And at the center of that alliance stood 3 men: Captain Ibrahim Traore of Burkina Faso, General Abdourahmane Tiani of Niger, and Colonel Assimi Goïta of Mali. Together, they represented a new breed of leadership: military, anti-Western, pan-Africanist, and unapologetically sovereign. The drone incident wasn't just about borders. It was about sovereignty, something the AES had sworn to protect at all costs. The moment Mali's drone was shot down, it wasn't just a Malian aircraft that had been attacked. To the AES, it was an assault on their collective dignity. It struck at the very heart of their alliance. In Ouagadougou and Niamey, there was no hesitation. The response was swift, coordinated, and public. The withdrawal of ambassadors, the condemnation of Algeria, the closed airspace. It was a show of force, not just to Algiers, but to any regional power that dared interfere. This wasn't just about defending Mali. It was about drawing a line in the Sahelian sand. The AES was built on the principle that an attack on one is an attack on all, a phrase often used by global military alliances, but rarely lived out so boldly in Africa. And this time, it was backed not by foreign troops or UN peacekeepers, but by the combined will of 3 nations charting a new path. The images told the story. Traore standing shoulder to shoulder with Goïta, Tiani declaring that the Sahel would never again be dictated to from outside. Military parades, border drills, joint statements written not in diplomatic jargon, but in the language of resistance. In this new order, Algeria, once the respected mediator of the region, was now seen as part of the old guard, a relic of a system the AES was determined to dismantle. And in standing with Mali, the AES wasn't just defending territory. They were defending an idea that the Sahel could govern itself, protect itself, and decide its own future on its own terms. For Mali, this isn't just a skirmish over a border or an overzealous drone patrol. It's a matter of survival. Since the collapse of central authority in the north over a decade ago, Mali has struggled to assert full control over its vast desert territories. The Tuareg uprisings fractured the country's unity, and despite peace accords and foreign intervention, the northern region remains a contested, volatile zone. For the current military government in Bamako, reclaiming that territory isn't just a military goal, it's a political imperative. Every drone flight, every military patrol in the north is a message: Mali is back in charge. So when Algeria shot down the drone, it wasn't merely an act of defense. It was, to Mali's leadership, a slap in the face. A message that someone else still believes they have a say, in what happens inside Malian borders. Behind closed doors, there's growing concern in Bamako that Tuareg factions, disillusioned with the failed Algiers Accord, are regrouping. Whispers of rearmament, foreign support, and a new rebellion are getting louder. And to Mali's president, Algeria's history with these groups makes it the prime suspect. This is about more than optics. It's about protecting Mali's sovereignty, crushing any threat of secession, and proving that this time, unlike in 2012, the state will not lose control of the north. From Algiers' point of view, the AES bloc, military-run, anti-Western, and increasingly pro-Russian, represents a growing threat to regional stability. Algeria, while no friend of Western hegemony, has long favored balance. Its diplomacy, especially in the Sahel, was built on quiet negotiation, mediation, and carefully calibrated soft power. Now, with AES asserting military dominance and aligning more openly with Russian interests, Algeria fears being boxed in. The presence of Russian advisors, mercenaries, and now, potentially permanent military bases just south of its borders is unsettling. For decades, Algeria has maintained a heavily militarized southern frontier, partly to keep out instability from Mali and Niger. It has fought its own internal battles against jihadism, and any hint of cross-border insurgency is treated as a red flag. So when a drone flies near Tinzaouten, it's not just a foreign aircraft, it's a potential threat, a symbol of creeping instability, and possibly even espionage. But Algeria's bigger concern is losing control over the regional narrative. It once held sway as the elder statesman of the Sahel, the go-to mediator in times of crisis. Now, with the AES taking center stage, that influence is waning, and Algiers is being portrayed not as a peacekeeper, but as an antagonist. Yet, beyond the motivations of Mali and Algeria lies a much bigger risk, one that could engulf the entire region. The drone that was shot down wasn't armed. It wasn't part of an airstrike. But it carried with it a symbolic payload, a bold statement that Mali would no longer be bound by the rules of the past. That it would watch, patrol, and defend its skies on its own terms. Airspace closures between Algeria and AES countries are more than political gestures. They choke off trade routes, disrupt humanitarian aid corridors, undermine regional cooperation on terrorism, trafficking, and migration. Civilian airlines are rerouting. Goods are delayed. Border towns are feeling the pinch. And worst of all, there's no dialogue. Neither side seems willing to blink. Algeria feels insulted. Mali feels betrayed. The AES feels targeted. And international observers? They're watching in silence, unsure whether this is a passing storm or the opening act of a broader confrontation. The peace process with the Tuaregs hangs by a thread. Russian involvement is rising, and old alliances are being tested. In this climate, the drone strike is no longer just an incident. It's a match dropped on dry grass. And the Sahel, already one of the most fragile regions in the world, is suddenly on the edge of something far more dangerous. As tensions between Mali and Algeria escalate, the silence from the international community is deafening, but far from neutral. In West Africa, eyes quickly turn to ECOWAS. The regional bloc, once quick to sanction and suspend military regimes, has grown unusually quiet. In past years, the downing of a military drone and the diplomatic fallout that followed would have triggered emergency meetings, statements, and perhaps even mediation teams. But now, ECOWAS seems paralyzed, still reeling from the formation of the AES and its withdrawal from the bloc. Once the gatekeeper of regional diplomacy, ECOWAS now finds itself sidelined, its authority under direct challenge by a trio of defiant neighbors who no longer recognize its legitimacy. AES doesn't answer to Abuja. It doesn't wait for Accra or Dakar to weigh in. And this drone incident has only widened the diplomatic chasm between the two camps. The African Union, too, has remained on the sidelines. Traditionally cautious in the face of intra-African tensions, the AU has so far offered little beyond generic calls for dialogue and restraint. But the truth is, the organization is caught in a difficult position. Algeria is one of its most prominent North African powers, while Mali, Burkina Faso, and Niger have become a bloc of their own, arguably more aligned with Russian and anti-Western ideologies than with the AU's diplomatic consensus. That brings us to the quiet but undeniable presence of Russia. While Moscow has made no official statement on the incident, the growing influence of the Africa Corps, successor to Wagner Group, is no secret. Russian advisors are embedded within the Malian military. They have helped train AES forces, and according to multiple sources, they have also played a role in the drone surveillance program that Algeria found so provocative. Whether the drone was operated with Russian technical support remains unknown. But the symbolism is clear. Where the West once provided security, Moscow now steps in, with fewer conditions and far more loyalty to military regimes. For Algeria, this is deeply unsettling. Long used to being a regional heavyweight, it now faces an emerging bloc of southern neighbors that not only reject Western influence, but also welcome Russian boots and drones in their own backyard. And yet, even as tensions climb, neither the United States nor the European Union has said much. For Washington, the focus has shifted to Ukraine and the Pacific. For Paris, the Sahel, once seen as a key security priority, has become a sore point, especially after being pushed out by the AES states. So the world watches, quietly, cautiously. Everyone knows what's at stake. A misstep could ignite a broader confrontation. But for now, no one wants to be the first to speak too loudly. Because in a region where one wrong move can spiral into open war, the silence might just be the loudest warning of all. When the dust began to settle after the drone was shot down and embassies started lowering their flags, one voice cut through the silence with the force of a thunderclap. Captain Ibrahim Traore. Young, defiant, and deeply ideological, Traore has quickly become the face of a new Sahel, one that's tired of waiting for Western donors, tired of empty promises from the African Union, and most of all, tired of foreign interference. So when Algeria moved against Mali, Traore didn't just issue a diplomatic note, he gave a sermon. Standing in front of his nation's flag, flanked by military commanders and holding nothing back, he declared, "We will not tolerate foreign interference. Not today, not ever." The words were aimed directly at Algiers, but the message was bigger. Traore was addressing every capital, north and south of the Sahara, that still believed the AES nations were fragile, fractured, or waiting to be reabsorbed into the old regional order. He was saying, loudly and clearly, that the Sahel was done playing by someone else's rules. Traore's condemnation of Algeria was sharper than anything that had come out of Bamako. He accused Algiers of not only violating Mali's sovereignty, but of attempting to sabotage the very stability the AES was trying to build from the ground up. To Traore, this wasn't just about one drone, it was about decades of disrespect. From France, from ECOWAS, and now, from Algeria. There were also rumors, unconfirmed but widely circulated, that AES defense chiefs had met within days of the drone incident. Military coordination exercises near the border were reportedly accelerated. AES troops began moving in tighter formation along key border points, and drone surveillance didn't stop. It doubled. Traore's broader message wasn't just one of outrage. It was about unity and resistance. He invoked history. He referenced colonial borders. He talked about the Sahel's role in shaping a new Africa, one that would rise from the dust not through aid or apologies, but through strength and self-determination. His speech was broadcast across the region. It was translated, subtitled, dissected. And to millions of young Africans, especially in the Sahel, it was electrifying. In that moment, Traore wasn't just backing Mali. He was drawing a line for Burkina Faso, for Niger, and for every nation tired of being told how to defend its own sky. In every geopolitical crisis, lines are drawn, alliances are tested, and narratives are crafted. But behind the speeches and sanctions, there's always the cold calculus of winners and losers. For the AES bloc, this moment, while tense, may be exactly what they needed. By standing with Mali, both Burkina Faso and Niger have reinforced the image of an unshakable alliance. To their supporters, especially the youth across the Sahel, this is more than diplomacy. It's proof that AES is more than just initials on a treaty. It's a living, breathing political force willing to fight, politically and potentially militarily, for its members. And in this narrative, Mali isn't isolated. It's emboldened. Mali itself gains more than just solidarity. Domestically, the president now appears stronger, more in control. A foreign adversary has rallied the population and silenced internal dissent, at least for now. National pride has surged. The drone, now a symbol of defiance, has helped turn what could have been a diplomatic embarrassment into a show of strength. And then there's Russia, watching from a distance, but benefiting all the same. Every time AES countries clash with a traditional power like Algeria or ECOWAS, Russia's value as an ally grows. Without lifting a finger publicly, Moscow's stock rises as it gains deeper access to Sahelian security architecture and political influence. Whether through the Africa Corps or arms deals, Russia's shadow looms ever larger across the region, and that suits the Kremlin just fine. But on the other side of the equation, Algeria is taking hits on multiple fronts. Once seen as a trusted mediator, its credibility in the Sahel has been shaken. The downing of the drone, rather than affirming control, has cast Algiers as heavy-handed and untrustworthy in the eyes of the AES and their supporters. The narrative has flipped, from regional elder to regional bully. Its soft power has taken a blow. Worse still, the peace process with the Tuaregs, already fragile, is now at real risk of collapse. If northern armed groups interpret Algeria's actions as coordinated pressure from the north, they may harden their stance or even reignite armed resistance. And let's not forget civilian life. With airspace closed and borders tense, trade has slowed, prices are rising in remote regions, and families who straddle the border face separation and uncertainty. In this standoff, some gain influence, others lose trust. But for the region as a whole, the biggest loss may be time, a precious commodity in a place where even brief calm is hard-won. No one knows exactly where this is heading, but everyone feels the tension in the air like a storm building over the Sahel. For now, there's no active shooting across the border, no airstrikes, no ground incursions, but the language, the posture, the silence, it all signals a dangerous trajectory. Because in this kind of standoff, it only takes one miscalculation, one drone too close, one soldier too far forward, one statement too sharp, and the spark could become a blaze. Will it happen? Some analysts believe Mauritania, with its historically neutral stance and shared cultural ties, could step in quietly as a mediator. There are whispers in diplomatic circles that Mauritanian officials have reached out to both Bamako and Algiers behind closed doors. But no formal dialogue has emerged, not yet. Others believe ECOWAS, despite its damaged credibility with AES, might attempt a back-channel initiative, not for AES's sake, but to preserve regional trade and stability. But how do you mediate a crisis when one side doesn't recognize your authority? And then there's Algeria itself. Will it double down, perhaps through border deployments or air patrols? Or will it attempt to salvage its reputation through restraint and negotiation? For a country used to pulling strings quietly, this very public showdown has left it uncomfortably exposed. Meanwhile, the AES isn't backing down. On the contrary, military movements near the Mali-Algeria border have reportedly increased. Joint exercises are being discussed. Some even speculate about a coordinated AES drone defense strategy, developed with Russian input. What happens next could redefine the Sahel for decades. This is no longer about a single drone. It's about power, pride, and a new African order taking shape under fire. And with so many armed actors, so much history, and so little trust, this story is far from over. If you believe in an Africa that rises on its own terms, if you support this movement for self-reliance, dignity, and progress, then be part of the change. Like this video, share it far and wide, and let the world know that a new Africa is here. And of course, make sure to subscribe to Azizi Africa, where
We are going to videos, strange and odd news stories, and as always, let's go ahead and get right into today's video.
ABC News has obtained a videotape that shows clearly what happened when the president fell ill. Here's White House correspondent Ann Compton.
Here's something odd I came across. This is President Bush Sr., not to be confused with his son, a later president. And in 1992, he vomited on the Japanese prime minister and then fainted. Now, the odd things. Firstly, I don't remember this happening at all. But now there's all these clips on YouTube I'm just seeing. Secondly, watch his wife. That's Barbara Bush, who some say is Aleister Crowley's daughter. Some say is a man. As soon as she sees he's gonna vomit, she darts over to cover his mouth and nose. Possibly the worst thing you could do, right? Was she trying to hide something being seen from camera? And thirdly, look at this news clip. They are about to report that the president died the same day, then suddenly backtrack.
This just into CNN headline news, and we repeat, or we say right off the bat, we have not confirmed this through any other source. Stop. We are now getting a correction. We will not give you that story. It was regarding some rather tragic news involving President Bush, but...
Now, I have to say, I never heard of this news story before where George Bush Sr. had thrown up on the Japanese prime minister, but then again, I was around 6 years old when this had happened. But the video footage is rather bizarre given the fact that Barbara Bush, she jumps up immediately to George Bush's aid, which is fine, but the fact that she covers and hides his face, which is not something you would do if a person is vomiting, given the fact that they may vomit again and you could block their airways. You know what this reminds me of? This reminds me of the time that General Petraeus, he started to have a seizure on camera. Some people believe that he may have been shapeshifting. John McCain witnessed this and he started to get freaked out. He jumped back. But all these people started to surround him so you could not see what was going on. Then he stands up and walks out like nothing had happened. Then we had the news anchor towards the end saying that it seemed like he was going to say that he passed away, which is interesting given the fact that there are unclassified documents of George H.W. Bush reflecting on that incident. Reading this article right here, which was published on December 22nd, 2023, it says, or it's titled, Diplomatic Documents, Bush Reflects on Collapsing at Prime Minister's Dinner in 1992. And this article goes on to say how, according to a top-secret official telegram conveying the exchange, Bush said he did not remember fainting at all, and he gave a courtesy call to the Prime Minister of Japan. And he also goes on to say that the last thing he remembered was seeing a beautiful light and feeling like he was in a quiet heaven. They say immediately after this, he stood up, went right to his car, and left. Now, there are some people in the comments of other videos about this incident. They are saying that perhaps he really did pass away and he was replaced and so forth. But who really knows? All I know is that this clip is pretty weird. Now, I know some people are going to say that this isn't weird at all. What Barbara Bush did wasn't weird. Anytime my Meemaw throws up, I suffocate her with a pillow. Look, that's between you and Meemaw. Moving on. This next video comes from Ginger Puss LLC on TikTok.
I can't even say that, Bill. Research scientist Amanda Wen will be aboard the fully autonomous 11-minute journey above the international... I can't even say that, Bill. Research scientist Amanda Wen will be aboard the fully autonomous 11-minute journey above the internationally recognized boundary of space. The crew will experience...
Gail King, I'm just going to make the prediction. Guess what's going to happen? They're going to pull a Challenger on them. Watch, I'm telling you right now. I'm telling you, as soon as I heard it like a couple of days ago, because I didn't know about this, but I heard it a couple of days ago, the hairs on the back of my neck just fucking stood straight up. They're going to pull a Challenger. Watch.
I can't even see.
Now look, I'm not saying anything disastrous is going to happen here, so if this is successful and everything is fine, don't want anybody saying that you said this was going to explode. I'm not saying that. What I'm saying is that what if it does? That's all I'm saying. What if this shuttle explodes? This would pretty much prove to me that these people are faking their passings and they are hiding underground in their fabulous underground bunkers. That's all I'm saying. So if you're not aware, on April 14th, the NS-31 mission will launch Monday. It's called the Blue Origin, and it's an all-female space flight with Katy Perry. The women are Aisha Bao, Amanda Wynn, Carrie Ann Flynn, Katy Perry, of course, Gail King, and Lauren Sanchez, I believe the fiance or the wife of Amazon founder billionaire Jeff Bezos. Now, I predict that this is going to be successful. People are going to point out how it's going to look like CGI or AI like certain previous events. But again, if something does indeed happen, this is really going to confirm a lot of suspicions that I have been having. But to say something is going to happen is not coming from me. What I find interesting is that there are news articles that came out back on March 2nd, 2025, articles that are titled, Gayle King warned not to go on Blue Origin space trip after top astrologer has terrifying premonition. Gayle King did not want to do this, but reading this article here, it says, once Kirby and Will and Oprah was fine with it, I was fine. I thought Oprah would say, no, she said. I think if you don't do it when they all come back and you had the opportunity to do it, you will be kicking yourself. And she goes on to say how she's right. Then the article continues to say, however, a Los Angeles-based astrologer revealed in a damning TikTok that King's horoscope showed the stars may not be aligned for the trip and urged the CBS News host to stay home.
I have to tell you, I'm so afraid. Stop, Gail. I am. I'm so afraid, but I'm also...
There's also an eerie video from CBS Mornings that says, Gayle King says goodbye before heading to space for the first time. And the video is very somber, and all the comments they are saying, don't go, please don't go, she's crazy, and so forth. So the whole thing has a very eerie vibe to it. And they're quoting the astrologer by saying, Miss King is headed to space, okay. She's getting in a rocket mid-spring. I believe, I don't know the exact date, so we're going April 15th, and her gut is telling her not to go, and I'm telling her not to go, astrologer Ashley Sipes said, and they continue to quote her by saying, I'm not saying something terrible or tragic is going to happen, but this just doesn't feel right to me. Then we have the numerology at play here, the number 6, and we often see 6 connected to these tragedies, like people are pointing out how the number 6 was connected to the helicopter crash in New York. And 6 plays a very strange role in a lot of bizarre news stories. This story just screams Titanic submersible. Remember that submersible that had imploded with all those billionaires on board. But who knows? Who really knows? Like I said, the first thing that went off in my mind were these underground bunkers, especially given the fact that Lauren Sanchez will be on board. Yesterday, I had uploaded a video where in Jamaica, Hellshire, Jamaica, a container full of Predicts chicken arrived on their shores. People were taking this chicken, they were eating this chicken, but they were warned not to eat the chicken because perhaps it could be contaminated. Well, more and more people are finding shipment containers in their neighborhoods. This video comes from New 2025.
All right, y'all, look. It's not just Jamaica they be doing that shipping container. See that? See that train? Whole container with a freezer on the back. Let me show you. It's a freezer on the back of that. They got it parked right in the neighborhood where people can see it from the street. You see that? Listen to it. I don't even think it's a lock on that, man. You see, when intended for a certain area, this is what they do. They put it there, just like this.
Now, he goes on to say that this container was there for 4 days, and a lot of people are saying that this could be some kind of bait container. They are hoping that people will take whatever inside this container, and maybe if it's food, they'll eat it, and who knows what this could pass around if it's contaminated food. The easy solution to all of this is not to go near that container, open it up and take the contents out that container, but perhaps they are dropping these off at locations where people are struggling and they know that, hoping that once again people will take the bait and grab whatever inside.
Alright, so check this out. This is something I noticed not that long ago. This right here is Breakfast in America by Supertramp from 1979, right? Look at this. You're in an airplane window. We got the two towers right there. What does that say above it? Come on.
That is such a big coincidence that it's not even a coincidence. That is very intentional. Yes, it's a Supertramp album that's a U and a P, but mirrored, you get a 9 and 11 over those towers. But this is not the only album that people connect to what happened that day. There's also Michael Jackson's Blood on the Dance Floor that came out in 1997. People are saying that it looks like Michael Jackson, he's stretching his arms out as if he's pointing to the time on a clock. One arm points to the 11 and the other arm points to a 9. And if you look behind him, you can see smoke and what looks like to be New York. And at the bottom, you can see the Free People's Checkerboard. But there is a plethora of different media, a ton of predictive programming that connects right back to that day. The X-Files Smoking Gun spinoff really blows my mind. And somebody did an entire breakdown of the movie Back to the Future, and they basically say that Back to the Future is a 9/11 plot. While that may sound crazy, while that may sound kooky, watch the video. It's very, very well done. And I'll go ahead and actually link it in the description box of this video. This next video comes from the Paranormal Chick on TikTok.
The following footage is from a young man named Connor Kelly. This was actually captured about 3 years ago. He and his family had heard of McCoy Mine out in Nevada, and while they were out riding, they decided to go and investigate the mine. But they captured more than they intended, and it all left them feeling unsettled and scared. Take a look at this footage and pay attention to the pile of shoes and bones that they found. Some of those shoes go back decades, and some looked newer. But the question they all had leaving that mine: who or what was there and still may be there? There are no follow-up videos, and he actually hasn't posted anything in several years. So I don't have a follow-up story for you, just questions. Take a look at this footage, comment below, tell me what you think.
Do you see that reflection? They're trying to...
Check it out.
Oh.
Oh, Jesus, what the fuck? It's a shoe.
Oh,
okay. Is that like a fossil? Dead animal? Or human?
Okay, wait, don't move, Wyatt. So that's bone over there? Yeah, Dad.
Check it out.
So this is more than a little disconcerting. It's just a pile of shoes and there's some bones in there.
There's like bones. There's bones.
Pile of shoes and bones. Down there. Well, that's where the Yeti leaves his victims. Thanks, Shane. Hey, Wyatt. Fall back. Wyatt.
There's like ribs and stuff.
Yeah, dude, let's let Shane take point here. First off, Wyatt, let's let Shane get a clear shot so you can look at the shoes. Second off, you look at the ground for prints. I think that's Wyatt. Did you take a picture of that Shane, Connor? I've been videotaping everything. Okay, well, let Shane go a little bit.
Check out the Yeti bones.
So these shoes are extremely disconcerting. Something's freshly come up. Really? Is the dirt wet right there? Mouse droppings.
No, that's bad droppings. It's guano.
Let's see. did you see these shoes that I got? Yeah, well, that's a bone right there. Actually, there's quite a few bones in this.
No, it looks like a cow or a horse.
Way too big for a human. So, I kind of want to see what's in there.
There's nothing that's fuzzy like this.
Well, it's not actually.
What's even more bizarre is the fact that there is absolutely no follow-up whatsoever when it comes to this story. I try to look online to see if I can find any more information, but this is all there is. There's no follow-up as to who these shoes belong to, if police ever came out, and so forth. It's like the people who had recorded this video footage had just fell off the face of the earth. When I see things like this, a few things come to my mind. People who go missing in mountains, people who go missing in national parks, the missing 411, and the so-called elite when it comes to tunnels. Now, the people who are taking the video footage joke that it may be a Yeti, but to me, I think something far more worse is at play here.
Okay, massive trigger warning. Did y'all know that there was a game that was on Steam that just got pulled off Steam that is a grape simulator? Yes, you heard that right. It encourages people who play the game to never take no for an answer and to be a woman's worst nightmare, but that's not it, because there also is some family things with the storyline. And I quote, "No Mercy is a violent and explicit video game slammed as a simulator. It was taken off of digital distribution service Steam globally after being banned in multiple countries, as it should have been. It shouldn't have even made it on these platforms, or it should have even been created. The game centers around a protagonist who blanks his family members, including his own mother. Players are instructed to never take no for an answer." Mind you, little kids were able to play this game, and little kids did play this game because it was out for about 4 days. Even more than that, they make the women have real emotions, and that's the character there in the back. What is this world coming to? What in the evil and wicked? Because that's like taking like, what's the show? Black Mirror, that one episode of Black Mirror, to a whole nother level. This is insane. And if you're a woman out there who has been through this and they put out this sick stuff, imagine somebody's kid playing this game while their mother has been through this before, or their sister, or their girlfriend, or their wife, or their whoever, and they're playing. It's just, watch what your kids are playing and downloading, because reminder, this was on Steam, a pretty popular gaming platform, or a pretty popular gaming distribution platform. This is insane.
That video came from Zealous for Jesus, and I really have to say, that is absolutely wild. What type of mind would sit there, create such a game, upload it to a very popular gaming platform like Steam, thinking it's going to last, people are going to download it, buy it, and so forth? I truly think half of these games, not all, but half of these games are created by the three-letter organization, the CIA. They are PSYOPs, psychological warfare. Because I just can't buy the fact that somebody would think this was okay to upload on Steam. Now, those who are familiar with Steam will know there are already some very questionable games on that app, but that goes above and beyond.
Tonight, the beekeeping industry is in crisis over the shocking and unexplained deaths of hundreds of millions of bees over the last 8 months. Now, this could impact all of the U.S. as bees, called the backbone of agriculture, are responsible for pollinating, get this, more than a third of the nation's crops. CBS's Janet Shamlian in Savoy, Texas, has the story.
This is what an unfolding disaster looks like in the U.S. beekeeping industry. Each of these hives can hold as many as 80,000 bees, but for reasons no one can pinpoint, the bees in all these hives and tens of thousands more have turned up dead.
Have you ever seen it this bad?
Never, not even close. The data is showing us that this is the worst bee loss in recorded history.
Blake Shook is one of the nation's top beekeepers. He owns Desert Creek Honey and several other beekeeping businesses.
If this is a multi-year thing, it'll change the way we consume food in the United States.
That's a pretty significant statement.
It's huge. It's huge. I mean, if we lose 80% of our bees every year, the industry cannot survive, which means we cannot pollinate at the scale that we need to produce food in the United States.
Bees play a critical role in U.S. food production. In addition to making honey, they pollinate 75% of the fruits, nuts, and vegetables grown in the U.S. That's $15 billion worth of crops. So what's causing the deaths, and why now?
So these are dead bees in there, and they have always an identifier for a project.
Juliana Rangel studies them at Texas A&M University.
One potential explanation is that over the last few years, we've seen some locations across the U.S. that have had lower forage available for bees. So when they're supposed to be blooming, let's say in April, they're blooming either earlier in the year or later in the year. And so we have these food deserts basically in the summer and fall that the bees sometimes cannot withstand.
Back at Shook's bee farm,
here we go with the hood.
We suited up for a look at his commercial operation.
Okay, you ready?
Yep.
All right, the first thing we do is smoke the entrance, and that calms the bees down.
This is what a healthy hive looks like.
And then in the center here, this is where the baby bees are raised.
These just returned from California, where the bees were used to pollinate almonds. Beekeeping groups say the losses may put as many as 25% of commercial operations out of business by year's end, with wide-reaching impact.
I got a call from a friend who has 20,000 beehives at the start of winter, and he's at less than 1,000. And he said, this is it. I'm done. And I've had far too many of those calls in the past weeks. It's not just a beekeeper issue. This is a national food security issue.
An industry
I just wonder if this has anything to do with certain things being sprayed in the skies. This, at the end of the day, has all to do with control. Of course, they don't want farmland. Bees are very important. Bees are very important for crops and so forth. Once the bees go, a lot of things go, and they get to really now control the food sources. This type of news story does not shock me one bit, the way that they spray the skies. It's very sad. It's horrible. Shocking? No.
So they've replaced the bells with cell phone towers. They say that the cell phone towers are safe, but there's been plenty of 1970s U.S. Navy documents and Department of Defense documents showing that they're not safe. When the bells ring, number one, they can deter a storm, which I thought was really interesting when I was researching. People ringing bells to get rid of the storms in Europe. And then also, too, they could heal and harmonize the surrounding land. And you could also ring a bell if there's a weirdo in the town. You know, you can ring the bell and make people aware that there's some strange people trying to invade your town. It kind of worked for different purposes. And the other reason, too, during World War II, a lot of the bells were destroyed. But I started to notice that that was after World War II that a lot of the bells were destroyed. And a lot of these pictures of those bells, they have language written on them. They have all these different languages that I've never seen before. The one was a combination of Spanish and Italian, and it was some old language. And I started thinking, oh, okay. So if you remove this, now people don't see these cultures or these people who also used to exist. So you get into bells, and it's a pretty remarkable one the more you go down it.
It is so true in the fact that bells make you feel absolutely amazing upon hearing them. And there are hardly any more bells. I mean, they do exist in certain locations, but we're talking about in the past, they used to be everywhere. But now you can see as they dig them up, a lot of these bells have been destroyed. They have been cracked. They have lost their natural attributes. And you have to ask yourself, why? Bells do have a sort of natural healing effect to them. But it's also been said that bells have exposed certain entities, certain beings, and this is why they are no longer around en masse like they used to be. A lot of these old bells that used to exist have a very similar crack to something like the Liberty Bell. Thank you so much for watching. If you like this channel and you want to see more, please subscribe. If you're
What's up, everybody? So, whatever happened to the holy cows? Are we in the end times yet or not? I guess there's two ways you can look at this. If you wait 2,000 years, then hey, what's 2001 years? But then on the other hand, every day that goes by that these cows may develop a blemish or a white hair is another day that this could all be foiled and we have to wait another 2,000 years. So you might get it while the getting's good. Nobody wants to have to reschedule the apocalypse for a little white hair. Okay, so what are we talking about here for the people that haven't heard of this? In the OT, any Hebrew that touches a deceased person is unclean for 7 days. I don't know if you've read the OT, but that means there's a lot of unclean time for people. Yahweh commanded a lot of wet work and then says, well, since you did what I told you to do, you're now unclean for 7 days. So a man who is clean is to sprinkle those who are unclean on the 3rd and 7th days. Then they have to wash themselves, wash their clothes, or they're expelled from the camp. To make this holy cleansing water, he says to tell them to bring you a red heifer without defect or blemish, and that has never been under a yoke. Give it to Eleazar the priest. It is to be taken outside the camp and slaughtered in his presence. He's to take some of the blood on his finger and sprinkle it 7 times toward the front of the tent of meeting, and then watch as the whole thing is burned. It's supposed to burn some cedar wood and hyssop in there, some red wool, scarlet wool, and then gather up the ashes that can then be mixed with water and sprinkled all over everybody for cleansing. And then there are some very specific rules about this, like it has to be done in view of the Holy of Holies, which is a debatable location. The ashes also have to be mixed in with the ashes of the former red heifers. There's been 10 of them total. And this has to be done by an appropriate Kohen, a priest, that basically they've specifically raised since birth to be ritually pure. And once all this is done, it can be used to purify everybody else. Until then, they're not allowed to go up on the Temple Mount and pray on the Temple Mount. Can't have a third temple. So in order for the prophecy to be fulfilled and Mashiach return and build the third temple, you got to do the thing with the cows. Now, one of the stipulations about the cows is it has to make it to 3 years old without any of these blemishes. So they had 5 candidates that they got from an American farmer that basically gene pooled them. But they started out with 5 of these, and they were supposed to have come of age in October 15th of 2023. I had done a video like a couple months before reporting on this. And then 1 week before that date, this happened. Recently, they've been using this as the reason for this happening. But as of October 15th, 2023, they had eligible candidates. And by the way, I know this doesn't sound like much, but evidently it's incredibly rare that you get a perfect red heifer. Even where I grew up, people will say, oh, that's a red heifer. It's something you're not going to find. So my question has always been, if you've waited that long and there's a chance that anything could go wrong, would you even wait an extra day? Well, it depends on who you ask, I guess. Like I've been saying for a while, it's kind of naive to assume that all grays, and if you're new here, that's when I can't say a certain name, I just say grays. And a lot of people assume that all grays want the same thing, but they should really listen to some lectures by them. It's hard to get a consensus on whether or not dinner was good. And I've heard 5 different opinions about each little aspect of how this ritual is supposed to take place. The Temple Institute, who really wants this to happen, has already made the priestly garments and all of these things that are required for this ritual. And I have heard them confirm that they have children that are viable for this. One part of being impure is if you've ever walked over a grave, then now you're impure. So they literally have a compound dug into bedrock where these children have been raised so they never accidentally walk across somebody's grave. Then they have certain protocols for getting the children to the spot of the ritual and then from there to the Temple Mount without becoming impure. You see this bridge that they've made here? Well, that bridge is made of arches upon arches. So in the event that there was a forgotten grave under that bridge, people walking on it wouldn't become impure. I did a deep dive into this a while back, and I'll just say this is what happens when God's lawyers start litigating the arbitrary rules of Yahweh, which I'll get back to in a minute. Now, they have convinced the entire Christian world that this has to take place on the Mount of Olives. But I've got my secret stash Robbie when I really want to know what's going on. I go and check out his channel, and he confirmed what I read on the Temple Institute's website. The actual burning of the red heifer needs to be done outside the camp, but still has to be in sight of the sanctuary. So everybody in the Christian world I've heard on this says, well, yeah, then it has to be the Mount of Olives. But here's a big clue. The blood must be sprinkled, quote, toward the front of the tent of meeting. Well, the tent of meeting has nothing to do with any of the temples that were ever in Jerusalem. This has to do with the tabernacle way back before all of that. After they got done wandering around, going from war to war with each new city they came across, they finally parked it at Shiloh for 369 years. That was a really durable tent. It lasted almost 400 years. But this was at Shiloh, not Jerusalem. So you want to guess where they have the 5 red heifers? Yeah, at Shiloh. And this is where they say today that the tabernacle sat. So while everybody's debating the logistics of how they're going to pull this off right in the middle of a very busy city and apparently build a bridge from the Mount of Olives over to the Temple Mount without angering all of Islam, well, when Yahweh actually decreed all of these things, he was talking about the tabernacle and not the Temple Mount. And out here, you could fly over and drop napalm on the cow, and nobody's going to notice because it's the middle of nowhere. Like I said, there's no consensus on any of this, but several Robbies agree with what I'm saying here. This also just happens to be right where they decided to house these cows as soon as they showed up there. So that being the case, they could have already done this without anyone knowing. This being the event that sets into motion the 7 years of tribulation, they might keep it under wraps. They're not exactly known for showing their hand. Now, here is something that has blown my mind for a long time, ever since I finally noticed it, is how few Christians have actually put 2 and 2 together here, thanks to CZ. So let's watch a good little gooey just drinking all this up. So he's asking here, are they going to have security and protection to complete this sacred event? Because what they believe about this is the third temple means the return of Jesus. And they actually think CZ is a thing instead of 2 totally different religions. So the Robbie answers, well, they're in Shiloh, which is surrounded by Arabs. And he says, I've gone on and spoke to the security people. And you know the real serious security guys because they're always smiling. Then he decides to drop a real serious joke here. What's the difference between a red heifer and a gray? Well, the Arabs will off either one. They don't care. So sure, they're going to have security. For us, it's just a way of life. We always have to have our security. It's our daily oxygen because they just always want to off us. Meanwhile, they're literally G-siding the people that they say they're trying to protect themselves from. But he goes on to thoroughly guilt trip the good gooey here, and then completely takes the wind out of his sails when he asks about the third temple and the second coming of Jesus.
I don't mind when people say, oh, it'll signal the coming of Jesus. I'm like, fantastic. Let's see. Let's just, I'm just required to make it happen. And if Jesus shows up, well, we'll deal with that then. And if he doesn't, well, we'll deal with that then. And
then launches into an attack against Christians, saying that Christians are attacking him. Yeah, there are a lot of Christians that are amping up the 8 Fred for Yeezy, just straight up Semitophobia, and then goes on to reference one video, the most popular of which got 1 million views, I think, and blah, blah, blah. You can read along for a second if you want. But the amazing thing here is they will straight up tell you, no, this has absolutely nothing to do with Jesus or Christianity. This is our thing. That's your thing. At least he's being honest about it, where the CZ movement has been convincing Christians for the last 100 years that there is such a thing as CZ. They're 2 totally separate things. Okay, so let's wrap up what the status of the red cows is, and then I'll throw in my 2 cents. It really depends on who you ask, and everybody's got insider info. But Robbie Ariel, who leads the Temple Institute, says, at this moment, it is unclear whether we have in our possession a red heifer that is verifiably kosher. So now we don't know. We had 5, but now we're not sure. We can't go out there and look at them. Robbie Ariel further explained that the 5 red heifers brought from America, which were thought to be viable, began to grow white hairs. Because of this, new calves must be bred, raised, and examined before purification rites can proceed. This is a major development, and it could mean a delay of several years. So let's review here. On October 15th, 2023, these cows came of age. And just 1 month before that, it was verified that they were still unblemished and acceptable. But it was decided that they'd wait just a little bit longer. And it was decided that they were going to bank everything on these 5 and not go ahead and start breeding more, apparently. Now, we're talking about the kind of people who invent things like hedge funds, but they decided they'd put all their eggs in one basket and just bank everything on these 5. And then when they came of age, they decided not to do anything. And what do you know? After waiting another 2 years, well, now they're blemished, so we have to start all over again. I'm not buying that. I think if they really wanted this thing to be done, then it'd be done. And I think it would have been done out here in the middle of nowhere where they didn't have to worry about other people, because when Numbers was written, when this decree came down from Yahweh, this was the location. This was before the time of Jerusalem. But once again, this goes back to not all grays wanting the same thing. You do know that over half of the country is protesting against the regime that's in place right now. And the Lionese are specifically a secular organization. They don't care about any of the religion part of it. They just want the land. But now they're officially saying, well, we don't even know if we have eligible cows anymore. I asked Mordecai to go check them last week and hadn't heard back from them. So make what you will of that. If it were me and this is truly what I believed and that this would bring about the kingdom of God on earth, I wouldn't have wasted an extra day. But this is what truly amazes me out of all of this, is how they've got so many Christians cheering this on. Because to the Greys, it's very clear that the Mashiach will be the builder of the third temple. But according to Christians and the book of Revelation, then the person that sits on the throne of the third temple is the Antichrist. So the Savior to some is the Antichrist to others, but we're all talking about the same thing here. To you guys that have been around here for years, you already know what I think about this. If you're new, we'll buckle up before we get into all that. I'm not going to do it in this video. So anyway, I guess the latest word on the street is they had their chance. They waited for 2 years and now they're all blemished. So they have to start all over from scratch. And all I can do is speculate whether or not that's true and whether or not they went ahead and did it in secret. So feel free to make up your own mind about that one. I hope you guys enjoyed it. I'll catch you on the next one. Static out.
Coffee. Follow me.